In this story, an ambitious and brave knight is destined to die on the battlefield. He used to believe that someone like him, whose talents awakened, blossomed, and took root on the battlefield, could start a new life. In that new life, he imagined he could finally create a family, which is something he desperately yearned for. But sadly for him, everything turned out to be just a pipe dream. The knight on his knees before us is none other than the famed Argric from the Drenic Empire, the protagonist of our story. His final opponent is also a great knight, who goes by the name Duke Thermion, one of the 6 Hexaclass knights of the Altheon Empire. Even Argric knows the weight of the challenge before him, especially since he has already felt the crushing pressure of the Black Wave after just a single day on this battlefield. Duke Thermion finds it fascinating that Argric still stands against him, despite knowing he is against one of the 6 Hexaclass knights. He even laments that it would be such a shame to end a blooming talent like our hero here. But Argric is far from surrendering. He defiantly swings his sword as he stands back on his feet and makes it abundantly clear that he was born on the battlefield, and this is where he'll die too. The two contestants begin to walk toward each other, and the sheer aura they exude sends the area into chaos. Duke Thermion can't help but point out that, even though Argric is being so brave, there is still a hint of regret lingering in his eyes. The Duke continues to talk about how Argric could have been a formidable rival for him in the future. But then, he charges his sword with energy, rushing straight at our hero while expressing hope that, once he gets a new life, he will be able to let go of his regrets. With that, the Duke swings his sword, but before Argric kicks the bucket, he narrates that the war between the Drenic Empire and the Altheon Empire has lasted for many years. His mother was a victim of this war, and he was just a newborn when she died due to the chaos around them, leaving him alone in this tumultuous world as an orphan. While other children play with toys and read books, he struggled to contribute to the war and fight for his kingdom. After turning 14, he had to pick up the sword himself and was sent to his first battlefield. He fought bravely, and it was in this moment that his talents awakened. The mana core in his heart amplified his movements and senses to a level he could never have imagined before. He began rising through the ranks among the knights, and surprised everyone by harnessing 3 mana cores and becoming a quad core with 4 cores. His dream of joining the 5 Hexaclass Knights of the Empire was within reach. He finally had the opportunity he had been desperately wanting. He believed that this last war might finally bring him peace from his weary life. So, he fought his final battle valiantly, knowing he was on the brink of achieving everything he had ever dreamed of. That was until Duke Thermion arrived on the scene, and his mere presence sent everyone scattering. Back in the present, that first swing from Duke shatters Argric's sword into bits and pieces, and his dream instantly shattered before his eyes. And the next blow from the Duke pierced his heart, and he reflects how all he wanted to create a family, but he lost. The stab wound sends him flying across the battlefield, crashing hard onto the ground. The impact shatters the earth beneath him as he slides, leaving him bloodied and battered. As he begins to lose consciousness, everything fades to pitch black. But the veil of darkness lifts the moment he opens his eyes. The first thing he sees is husband and wife trying to play with him, or rather, they are trying to play with their child. Argric quickly starts losing his shit once he hears them calling him their child. His father quickly hoists him up, and with a broad smile over his face, he addresses him as Dane. He tells him he must become a fantastic spearman and follow in his father's footsteps. His mother, who goes by the name Lily Sogris, quickly yanks him out of his husband's arms, insisting he will become a fantastic assassin. The husband, Arkan Sogris, and his wife both argue about which career their son should pursue, while Argric feels timid and confused by the bickering. They are apparently traveling in the carriage toward their home, and they argue throughout their journey about the same thing. Lily believes that sneaking through the darkness to assassinate targets and slipping away untouched is a much cooler path, while the father insists that the spear is the most beautiful and complete martial art. Well, that's how it goes for our hero. Just when he had thought he was done for in that battlefield, he miraculously ends up reincarnating. The twist in his story is that he finds himself in the Altheon Empire, his enemy, as the youngest son of a certain count. Once the carriage finally hits the brakes as they enter the mansion grounds, his parents come to a middle ground and decide they'll teach him both skills. But Lily still has not given up, and annoyingly states that their son will become an assassin, while Arkan just laughs it off, insisting that Dane will become a spearman. The carriage driver shakes his head, signaling their arrival, and both parents are a bit confused that they're already there. I guess they must have lost track of time while arguing with each other. The husband quickly hops out of the carriage and decides to help his wife down as well. He extends his hand to her, and she feels a bit embarrassed, and asks him what if the members of the castle see them. He chuckles and replies that he's just trying to hold his wife's hand, so why would that even matter? With that, he escorts his beautiful wife out of the carriage, while Argric can't help but feel awkward watching his dad act like such a simp. But eventually, his awkwardness fades as his eyes widen after taking in the grandeur of the castle. Once they finally make their way inside, Lily can't help but notice how happy Dane seems to be back home. I mean, why wouldn't he be happy? With a house like this and parents that wealthy, it might be easier for his talents to spread their wings than he ever thought possible. 2 months pass since that day, and we find Lily chatting with her son, who has started to babble. She's thrilled that he's finally making sounds, while our boy is equally fascinated to experience this babbling firsthand, something he never got to hear before. You see, opportunities to meet young children were scarce during his time wandering on the battlefield. The few kids he did see were often wrapped in bandages, crying because they had nowhere to go. Many mourning for parents who slowly succumbed to destruction and faded away. So, compared to that, his new home is a fortunate and wealthy place, and he's relieved he won't be starving here at all. Suddenly, the father bursts through the room's door, enthusiastically stepping in with a spear in hand. He proudly announces that this is called a spear. It seems that our boy is not at all a fan of his father's enthusiastic side. He is having a hard time believing that this man is his father, who is the strongest Hexa-class spearman in the Empire, known as Arkan Sogris. Even though he does not look like a war hero at all, but he was in fact a war hero known as the Blue Whirlwind. His wife gets annoyed and starts pushing him away from the kid, asking how he could enter the child's room with something so sharp. The man begins to lose his cool under her intense gaze and timidly says he just wanted to show it to Dane. But she's giving off a deadly vibe, reminding him that didn't she tell him they wouldn't be teaching their son anything until he reached an appropriate age? Well, it's not surprising that this grown man is trembling in fear under her sharp gaze, because his wife is the best assassin in the Empire. Meanwhile, she argues that if he keeps this up, she's going to teach their son the basics of stealth while he's still young too. He tries to argue that everyone is doing early education these days. Even one of the famed magic houses, known as House Teleport, puts a staff next to a child the moment they're born. But his wife gets annoyed again and asks if the spear looks like a staff to him now. Meanwhile, our boy reflects and tells us that the reason his parents are putting so much importance on his future is that his 2 older sisters chose careers that have nothing to do with spear fighting or assassination. Noon arrives, and we see his 2 sisters playing around with their younger brother, making his cheeks look all sore. One of his sisters, Arabella, laughs and says he looks even cuter now with stuffed cheeks. Meanwhile, our boy narrates about Arabella and reveals that because of her talent in magic, she has been on the path of a mage since she was little. By 12, she was already a 3-chain class mage, and since the highest class for a mage is 9 chains, it means she's a genius who has already surpassed the entry level. Arabella then asks his little brother if he wants to learn magic with her later, saying she has gotten bored learning by herself every day and would be happy to teach her little brother a thing or two. While Arabella is full of energy, her sister Claire is totally the opposite. Nervous and composed, she timidly says she can teach him summoning, since it's a handy trick to have in your back pocket. Just like Arabella, Claire is a talented girl who excels in summoning. She successfully made her first summon at the age of 7 and can now handle 2 summons at once. Arabella then playfully tells Claire to touch him, insisting he's just too soft. But Claire seems wary about touching him, unsure if she should. Meanwhile, Dane is acting all cute and chummy, and reflects how he initially thought Claire didn't like him. Now he realizes it's more like she's feeling jealous because he's the youngest in the family now, stealing all the attention. Eventually, Claire extends her hand and gently touches his nose. She gets ecstatic and exclaims about how soft he really is. She touches him again and promises to teach him everything once he grows up. Dane can't help but find it a bit overwhelming how everyone wants to drill their own specialties into him. His father is a Hexa-class spearman. His mother is a talented assassin, though a retired one. And his eldest sister is a genius mage. Then there's Claire, who's also a genius summoner. The house of Count Sogres is the perfect noble family, the ideal family he always imagined. He wonders if there's even a point to seeking revenge in this new life. Sure, his death was regrettable, but that place was a battlefield. It's almost funny to think about taking revenge on someone who beat him fair and square. The entire family gathers in the hall, arguing among themselves and trying to convince each other how their specialties would suit Dane better. Watching this heartwarming chatter among his family brings a smile to Dane's face because this is the kind of family he's always hoped for, and he's glad he was born here. But when things start to escalate and everyone begins to fume at each other, he starts to doubt if this is what a harmonious family is really like. We then learn about the special ceremony that exists in the House of Sogres, which is known as the choosing ceremony. You see, when a child is born into the family and turns 1, various objects are placed on a table in front of them, and people try to predict the child's future based on what object they grab. Since a year has flown by, today is young Master Dane's turn, as he has already turned 1 year old, and he will choose his class. The gathered guests chat among themselves, noting how the young ladies became a mage and a summoner, and they wonder what young Master Dane will choose. They decide to make their way to the ceremony hall to find out what Dane will choose. Once the guests gather in the grand hall, we see that Dane is sitting near 4 different items, each belonging to a different class. As the crowd gathers around the table where Dane is sitting, his mother tells him he just needs to choose the one he likes. However, Dane doesn't look quite sure about what he should pick. He glances at his father, who is eagerly waiting for him to pick the spear. His father is smirking while thinking that little Dane will probably be drawn to the dragontail spear. Apparently this spearhead is made from rare ducran, and when mana is imbued in it, it becomes as sharp and heavy as the mana the user puts into it. On the other hand, his mother feels happy and proud while thinking that Dane is too handsome to become an assassin. Still, she's sure he'll end up choosing the dagger. This dagger isn't just any simple knife. It's called Nighthorn, and is made from ethereal ore, which can hold all the world's elements and store multiple different poisons. Just like their parents, Dane's sister is confident that he will become a great mage, and that he'll choose the pouch to keep the mage's legacy alive. This bag is also a special subspace pouch, an object that can only be used by mages or those with magical talent. On the other hand, Claire, with her usual timid expression, wonders if Dane can summon. The item before him is actually a summon sign, which is a summoner's tool. Summoners use this sign to receive a code based on their talent, allowing them to call upon their summons. But Dane is feeling quite confused and unsure about what to do, because he can literally hear the thoughts of his family members. Eventually, he lets out a sigh and makes his final decision. He starts crawling toward the items, and the crowd's excitement rises with anticipation. As he picks up speed, his parents and siblings are absolutely overjoyed to see him moving, cheering him on in their own ways. His father tells him to choose something sturdy, while his mother encourages him to pick something short and sharp. As he gets closer, a yellow light begins to shimmer from all the items laid out on the table. Dane has no idea what's happening, and his family is just as clueless. On the other hand, the crowd smiles and gets excited as well as shocked when they realize that all of the 4 items just reacted, which is something unheard of. They can't help but admit that the young master seems like a generational genius after all. Meanwhile, Dane is just as bewildered by the situation. He recalls how he was a talented soldier in the battlefield, but in this life, he feels like he's on a whole other level. Little Arabella curiously asks her father what they should do since this has never happened before. But both their father and mother look just as lost, realizing that this means they need to teach him all 4 elements. Of course, this shocks the other 2 ladies, while Dane just smiles heartily in response. Time passes, and we find ourselves in the training hall, where we can hear weapons clashing. It turns out to be none other than Dane and his father. By the looks of it, our boy has grown a lot since we last saw him, which was only about 30 seconds ago, if I'm not mistaken. Arkin flashes a broad grin at his son for his good results, as Dane has perfectly polished the technique he taught him before. The boy thanks his father, and we learn that Dane has now turned 7. As they share a fun laugh, a man suddenly appears on the scene. Dane looks at him curiously, and we see that the man is presenting a spear. Seems like Arkin was clearly expecting the spear to arrive, and he promptly grabs it and offers it to Dane, telling him that this is his birthday gift. He explains that he was originally going to give it to him during the birthday banquet, but he wanted to give it to him before his mom's gift. Arkin further explains that he has been preparing this spear for 2 years, and that it was specially commissioned from a renowned craftsman in the capital. He then wishes him an early happy 7th birthday, and our boy eagerly drops his old stick and grabs the spear from his father, saying he'll use it because it's just so cool. He's really digging how the black handle and silver spearhead look together, and on top of that, it's surprisingly light. His father asks if he likes it, and he responds that he loves it. In fact, he's so excited that he starts fidgeting with it already. His father then asks if he knows the difference between a sword and a spear. Dane explains that with the spear's length, you can effectively keep opponents at a distance, and because of its small point of contact, it has a high attack efficiency. His father agrees, saying that's true, but warns him that as he gets stronger, it'll actually be harder to use than a sword. He points out the fundamental issue with spears. To attack, you need a minimum distance between you and your opponent, but he tells him not to worry about it too much since every weapon has its pros and cons. He explains that even swords, which are often called the perfect weapon, can be weak in certain situations. The son perks up at this, saying he'll keep that in mind. The father then starts spinning the spear in his hand and invites his son for a spar to show him something. Dane is absolutely boggled out of his mind to see the power radiating from his father. This is the first time he's witnessed the insane power flow of a hexaclass spearman, and the magic energy his dad is emitting is just overwhelming. After charging up, the father quickly thrusts the spear forward, and the space around the tip starts to distort. He explains that the reason for the distortion is that he released his magic power while thrusting the spear. This technique utilizes the trait of the core that focuses magic power in one place. The son mentions that he's heard about this from his sister, and explains that humans can exceed their physical abilities as the number of cores increases, meaning their limits can be pushed. He reflects on how, in his past, he had a quad core, and all this knowledge he has right now is from his previous life. Meanwhile, his father starts smiling broadly, thinking about how well his son has been studying, and reminds him that he now has 6 mana cores. Of course, our boy pretends to be shocked, but inside, he thinks about how, if he hadn't died, he could have achieved 6 cores as well. Then, his father encourages him to give his new spear a try. Dane looks a bit hesitant, but his father tells him to just relax his mind, forget his worries, and thrust the spear. The son agrees, and as he holds the spear, he reflects on how, in his past life, he had no interest in spears. After realizing his talent for swordsmanship, he had only used spears as a secondary option, but now, it's finally time for him to give it a try. After striking his stance, he closes his eyes, while his father reflects on how he's got a good form. He can't help but smile ear to ear because it took him 7 years to master this technique. But since his son is still so young, he wonders if he can even pull it off at all. But as soon as Dane thrusts the spear, reality shatters, completely subverting his father's expectations. He genuinely wasn't expecting this miracle to happen. He freaks out and begins to shout, asking his son how he knows so much. Once Dane finishes performing the technique, the man walks over to his son, laughing and saying he did an impressive job. Dane explains that at the moment he thrust the spear, he gathered magic power into one place and imbued it into the spearhead. When the magic power reached the spearhead, he cut off its flow. The father goes bonkers when he hears this and asks if he has formed a mana core. Dane replies yes, revealing that while he was reading a book about creating mana cores, he decided to try it out, and luckily, he was able to succeed. But of course he is lying, because the truth is that he formed it while practicing mana breathing. The father kneels down to get eye level with his son, unable to help but feel proud. He's sure that one day his son will become an extraordinary warrior. Dane just flashes a smile, while thinking in his head about all the surprises he has in store for the future that are sure to blow his father's mind. Meanwhile, the father wonders if his son will really become a mage, a spearman, an assassin, and a summoner all at once. As night falls, it's finally the start of Dane's 7th birthday. Guests are gathering in the castle, and the hall is filled with music and the clamor of laughter. Everyone is having the time of their lives. Duke Bout, the same guy who killed our boy in his past life, is also attending the party. Once he spots Arkin, he calls him over to catch up. Arkin addresses him with the title Duke, but Bout tells him to drop the formality and just talk like they usually do. As we know, Bout is from the greatest house of the Altheon Empire and the head of the Thermion Duchy. Arkin quickly dashes toward his friend and whispers that many people are watching them, so he needs to keep up the act of formality. The Duke tells him to do as he pleases and asks where his son is. That's when Arkin calls out to Dane and tells him to say hello to Duke Thermion. As soon as he hears the mention of Duke Thermion, Dane's mind flashes back into the past where he had the last encounter with this man. Once our boy finally appears before the Duke, he introduces himself as Dane Sugres and bows his head, saying it's an honor to meet him. The Duke laughs, impressed by the kid's manners, and asks his father if Dane is also learning to use a spear, to which Arkin replies that he is. At that moment, a little lady approaches Duke Bout from behind, and when Dane's eyes land on her, he is startled for a moment. The girl greets Count Sogres promptly, bowing her head to show her proper manners. She introduces herself as Layla Thermion, the youngest daughter of the Thermion Duchy. After this acquaintance, the celebration continued onward. The guests enjoyed the music and the beautiful evening. But this could not be said for Arkin Sogres and Bout Thermion, all because Baroness Thermion was still ill. And despite Bout's best efforts to find a cure or method to cure her, nothing worked. Arkin hoped that this was all just a temporary ordeal and his friend's wife would get better soon. But still, Bout warned him that if he suddenly disappeared, it would mean that his wife felt worse, and he used a teleportation scroll to return to the capital. Anyway, today is a party for Dane, who had just disappeared somewhere. To Bout, he seemed quite the witty child, and he wanted to talk to him a little more. Arkin didn't know where his son was either, and noticed that Miss Layla had disappeared with him. Finding them turned out to be quite easy. The two went for a walk together. They probably didn't like this boring party like dozens of others. But what the two were talking about was a mystery to their parents. In private, Layla was very talkative, and to be honest, she didn't like to follow her father to all these noble parties. But this time she was glad she had come. Layla had heard a lot about how handsome Dane was, but now he looked even better in the moonlight, and she liked this place. Dane was glad to hear that she liked it here. Unlike the capital, the Sogres family's territory was a nice and quiet place. That's why Layla envied him. At her house, there's always something going on. Nobles come every day with business and offers to her father. Sometimes even the imperial family shows up. And the most annoying thing is that every time someone comes, she has to dress in formal dress and go out to greet them. That's exactly what she just hates. Instead of all that, she'd like to wear something practical and simple and practice with her sword all day. Dane was surprised that such a small and seemingly harmless girl was practicing with a sword and not magic. He himself loved his quiet territory. It wasn't as lively as the capital, and it gives him a lot of free time to practice with his spear, which he just loves. Layla was surprised at first that he was using a spear, but then she remembered his father's nickname and everything fell into place. She had heard many times from her father how incredible Blue Whirlwind was, and since Dane is practicing so hard with the spear, it means he wants to join the academy too. However, that wasn't why Dane was practicing with the spear. Layla was surprised by this answer. For her to practice hard to join the academy was an obvious choice. She had heard that just getting in was incredibly difficult. Well, Dane didn't really doubt that he would get in, and he was only practicing because he wanted to be even better after he entered the academy. Layla couldn't believe his confidence, so she asked him what he would do if he failed to get in. Well, even in that case, our hero was not going to get upset and give up. Instead, he would just try again. And if even with the second attempt will not work, he will take it as an answer that this is not his way. Layla just couldn't believe such a casual attitude towards the future. So she asked him if he was afraid of upsetting his family and home. And of course, our hero was not concerned. Compared to the trials of his past life, it was nothing. Layla, on the other hand, had only to envy him. Her home considers failure to be unacceptable. Although Dane had lived surrounded by nobles for 7 years, he was still surprised at how petty nobles were for worrying about such stuff. As for Layla, he had no doubt that she would succeed. When she heard the encouraging words, she just lit up and gladly offered Dane to look at her swordsmanship skills. Our hero was a little surprised by such eagerness, but it was impossible to stop her when the opportunity to practice with a sword appeared on the horizon. Layla immediately asked where the training ground was, and Dane had to accompany her, hoping that nothing would happen there. On the training ground, Layla did not hold back and made move after move like an experienced swordsman. To a beginner's eye, her movements might have seemed perfect, but our hero was far from a beginner. Watching her movements, he had to admit that her transition from attack to defense and back flowed very smoothly, and the timings of her attacks were excellent. But there was one point. After a while, her movements stopped hitting the beat and lost their flow. Out of breath after the exercise, a satisfied Layla asked him what he thought of her movements. At first, Dane was not very honest and said that she acted fantastically and that he enjoyed watching her. Layla was quite pleased with this praise, but Dane decided to be honest with her. He noticed that she still had room to improve. For example, after the third form, Layla was taking a half step more than necessary. And then it happened again with subsequent forms. These repeated extra half steps then made the later sword forms feel slightly out of alignment. Such criticism left Layla speechless. It seemed like she was about to cry, and Dane was beginning to think that such criticism was too blatant for her. He even started to apologize for upsetting her, and even said that maybe he was wrong because he had seen the swordsman wielding the sword a long time ago. But he was worried for nothing. Layla quickly gained control of herself and gripped the sword tighter. Now she realized her mistake. Now she started repeating the training moves again, and this time they were perfect. Dane's advice was exactly the puzzle she was missing for perfection. Her joy and gratitude was unbounded. She even hugged Dane. Our hero tried to resist, but it didn't work so well. Layla was simply fascinated by how much he knew about swordsmanship. In an instant, he noticed what she had been doing wrong all this time, and what her teachers hadn't told her. She promised she would remember his help. Eventually, she let Dane go, nearly suffocating him in her arms. But then she almost chopped him with her sword. That little lady really needs a lesson in neatness. Dane was caught off guard by such a sudden hug, but you couldn't say he didn't like it. Of course, their moment of privacy was soon interrupted by the shouts of servants looking everywhere for them. They had rested enough from the banquet and were not going to hide, so they hurried back, so they wouldn't be found on the training ground. When they returned, Dane was the center of attention as his parents officially congratulated him on his birthday and the discovery of his first mana core, and of course they gave him a present. It was a brooch with the family crest, similar to the ones his older sisters had. His mother advised him to treasure the gift, for this brooch would now serve as a proof of his status and honor. After his parents, all the guests joined in the congratulations. Dane had now officially and truly earned the name Sogres, and no one present doubted that he would grow up to be a fine man like his father. Dane's parents were very happy, and so was little Dane himself, for it was the first time in his 2 lives that he had received such warm congratulations from so many people. Suddenly, the whole room shook. The guests started screaming and panicking, thinking it was either an earthquake or an enemy invasion. Dane also began to worry, but his father quickly reassured him that there was nothing to be frightened of. Arkan Sogres knew very well what was going on. Even though he had hoped that today would be a calm day, apparently his daughter didn't listen to him. Dane really didn't know that. Lightning bolts appeared near the very ceiling of the hall, and in a second, a portal appeared above the frightened guests. There was no end to the guests' bewilderment when a small figure flew out of that portal, who apparently laughed at the laws of physics, and landed on the floor without any trouble at all. It was Dane's older sister Arabella, and in her opinion, she wasn't late at all. The guests still couldn't lift their jaws from the floor, surprised that such a young lady could already use teleportation magic. Normally, to open even a small gate, one had to reach at least 5 chains. Dane did not admire her power at all, but rather was annoyed at how loud and flashy she was. But as soon as the guests calmed down a bit, a huge monster appeared in the sky. A large wyvern with a rider. It seems that this time Lady Claire frightened the guests. She was in a bad mood though. She was only one step too late to get ahead of her sister. As she entered, the guests around her started talking about how they had heard she was a brilliant summoner, but no one expected her to control a wyvern at only age of 16. Finally, they were home again. And together they stood before their parents and brother to wish a happy birthday to their little favorite brother Dane. After both of their flashy entrances, Dane's sisters hurriedly shoved their respective gifts at him, as they wished their little brother a happy birthday. He thanked Arabella and Claire for coming all the way back home, even though they were busy with their studies. The girls were just excited to see their little bro open the gifts. Duke Arkin nearly shed a tear at the preferential treatment his son was getting. His daughters only got him a letter for his birthday after all. Dane opened the box Arabella handed him, and inside was a ring transformed into a convenient dimensional pouch. She designed the artifact herself. The subspace magic used in its crafting belonged to the highest chain. Arabella's esteemed professor applied it to the ring. It is common knowledge just how difficult it is to imbue subspace magic into any item. Arabella took the ring and adoringly took her brother's hand to put it on. She must have spent a lot of time designing an artifact capable of withstanding a whole subspace. She also applied Dane's genetic code to the ring, so no one else would be able to use it except her little bro. It's a one-of-a-kind item. Mommy Lily examined the ring and saw a small wave of mana running around the artifact, which meant it was made using the highest grade of magic stones. Arabella explained that all Dane had to do was imbue a bit of mana into the ring, and the subspace would be established. It's much more convenient than normal dimensional pouches. That fact alone made this an invaluable artifact. As far as Dane could remember, these types of tools were something only used by the wealthy on the battlefield. Only noble-born commanders and high-ranking magicians wielded such convenient power. The ring would also grow as he got older, adapting to his body. Dane tried to imbue his mana into the artifact, and a green portal opened in front of everyone. Duke Arkin was stunned to see his son do it so effortlessly. Claire, Duke Bout-Thermion, and Layla were flabbergasted at the radiant display of magic. Dane managed to open a subspace faster than Arabella had done years ago. He was a genius, there's no doubt about it. It would be a groundbreaking feat if he managed to cultivate both a mana core and a mage's circle at the same time. After the display of magic, Claire came up to her little bro and handed him her gift. Dane slowly opened the present while sincerely thanking his big sis. Inside the wooden box was a peculiar-looking egg laid on top of a soft cloth. Confused, he grabbed the egg and asked what it was. Claire panicked and warned him to be careful with it, as it was not an ordinary egg. Everyone in the family was also curious as to what this odd gift was, but Claire only revealed what it was to Dane. She whispered that it was a familiar. She got it by accident while she was trying to summon Decaron. Claire herself doesn't know what will hatch from it, but everyone in the world knows how precious a familiar could be. Dane tried to picture what this odd egg would give him. He had heard about familiars before. Unlike summons, they are an entirely different entity. A familiar summoned once can permanently remain in the real world. Claire asserted that Dane should keep this egg a secret until it hatches in the future. He promised that he would. All the whispering between the two irritated Arabella, who was feeling left out. As for Claire's instructions, Dane must make sure to pour his mana into the egg once in the morning and once in the evening to make it recognize him as its master. Lily was just glad that her little boy was receiving such incredible gifts. It showed how much her children cared about each other. With the gift-giving done, Duke Arkin cleared his throat and reminded his daughters to at least say hello to their parents, seeing as they crashed the party after saying they might not be able to make it. Realizing that they hadn't said a word to their parents since arrival, the girls awkwardly greeted their father. Duke Arkin was a big softy when it came to his children, so he didn't really mind. He was just glad to see his girls again. Since they went off to pursue their professions, the girls rarely came home anymore, so Duke Arkin was glad to see them looking healthy. Layla watched the Sogre's family being so lovingly loud and jovial with one another from afar. The little girl could not help but compare her own home situation to theirs. Dane noticed her staring at them and turned his head. He noticed the dip in her mood as she silently walked away. He wondered why she looked so lonely and sad in the middle of a lively crowd of nobles. The banquet wrapped up, and the next day came. Duke Bout-Thermion stayed the night and was now walking through Sogre's territory. He could not help but think about how incredibly talented Arabella Sogres was. As expected of the best mage at the academy, her talent in the magical arts was unparalleled. The girl could be the perfect match for Duke Thermion's son, the academy's best swordsman. If House Sogris and Thermion could combine through a marriage between those two, it would give birth to a faction that could rival even the imperial family. If that happened, no one would be able to mess with both houses and their children. So, Duke Thermion decided to bring up the matter of engagement between the eldest children in today's conversation with Archon. On the way to meet the other Duke, Thermion caught the sound of steel nearby. It came from the training grounds, so someone must be honing their technique inside incredibly early in the morning. Of course, it was Dane polishing his spear skills with utmost focus. He had gotten quite deadly with the weapon. With years of training with his dad and his insane work ethic, he had long since become combat-ready. Dane's focus was unparalleled. He moved with the fluidity and sharpness of a veteran warrior, flying all over the battlefield while delivering multiple killing blows. He pushed his speed even harder and kicked the intensity to a higher gear. Finally, his arms blurred as he delivered countless spear stabs in a short amount of time. Curiosity got the best of Duke Thermion, and he ended up spying on the boy's training from afar. He was pleasantly surprised by the youngest son of House Sogres going sicko mode in training. With his experienced eyes, he could discern how incredibly polished Dane's technique was. His movements and concentration did not feel like those of a 7-year-old at all. Even his simple stabs were refined to a terrifying degree. Everything was executed to such a high degree that spearmen who have been on the battlefield for years could still learn from it. When Dane finally wrapped up his last sequence, he was huffing and puffing for air. Duke Thermion was thoroughly impressed from start to finish. What he had just witnessed felt impossible. He had heard rumors about the young Sogris showing incredible talent, even way back when he was just a baby. But he always thought those were just exaggerated hearsay. Now he knew those rumors were true. After a little break, Dane went back to practicing. He focused on his movement and footwork this time around. Being one of the strongest swordsmen in the land, Duke Thermion could not help but notice that the kid's stance and footwork seemed similar to a swordmaster's. The Duke started considering that the kid might have even picked up swordsmanship to a high degree at such a young age. Finally, Dane noticed that someone was watching him from the doorway. He brandished his spear, ready to strike, as he warned whoever was sneakily watching him to come out instead of hiding. Duke Thermion got too excited and ended up getting detected by a kid. It was not his proudest moment as a skilled warrior. The more he thought about Dane's movements, the more strangely familiar they felt. He was certain he had seen that same footwork somewhere before. The Duke had to reveal himself and apologize to Dane for eavesdropping on his private training session. He insisted he wasn't trying to do anything shady. Seeing as the eavesdropper was Duke Thermion, Dane felt bad for speaking out of turn. Even though he had been living in his current body for 7 years now, this man was still the one who defeated and killed him in his previous life. Remembering his etiquette training, Dane Sogres formally greeted the Duke. Duke Thermion confessed that he was mesmerized by the sight of the Rising Star's early morning training and apologized once more. The kid held his own, responding that he was forgiven. The Duke was amused by his guts to speak as if they were equals. Now that he had a closer look at Dane, he noticed that the boy's body wasn't even showing signs of fatigue or trembling despite such intense training. When he was his age, he hadn't even made a manicore. The Duke pointed out Dane's excellent stabbing attack, observing that the boy had inherited Archon's talent with the spear. The spear itself was also crafted really well. Dane formally thanked the Duke for recognizing his technique, and the old man smirked. Not only was this kid a lethal soldier, but he also knew what to say at any given moment. In comparison, his own son did not have such excellent skills and manners when he was 7. This little detour made Duke Thermion consider arranging a marriage between Layla and Dane as well. So he slyly interjected that his daughter had also been training her swordsmanship. He suggested that since they were of similar age, they should look out for each other once they entered the academy in the future. Dane continued responding politely. The Duke liked the young man's forthrightness. Finally, Duke Thermion excused himself so as not to bother Dane's training any more than he already had. But before leaving the training hall, he still had one more curious question he wanted answered. He wanted to know if the kid had ever trained in swordsmanship too. Dane made a mistake in front of the Duke. His old habits must have come out without realizing it. Given Duke Thermion's discerning eyes, it's not surprising that he recognized the minuscule habits in one look. Dane answered that he had just read some textbooks on basic swordsmanship, but had never formally trained in it. The Duke still found it strange that he sensed something akin to raw battlefield sense in the kid. But common sense dictates that an inexperienced child couldn't have that killer instinct. At last, the Duke finally got off his back and bade farewell, and Dane sent him off. Duke Thermion also extended an invitation for him to visit if he happened to come to the capital in the future. The swordsman had become personally interested in Dane's talents. Dane wondered if the man still remembered him. Just thinking about defeating someone who ended his life before was already getting his blood pumping. If he laid a solid foundation and prepared step by step, He was certain he could surpass the Duke. It's one of his goals to defeat the mighty Bout Thermian in this life. Continuing with his training, Dane lost track of time, and Hernan, the attendant, had to fetch him. He was always watching the kid from the shadows, always ready to attend to his needs. With Hernan's faint presence, Dane reckoned that this guy could be talented enough to learn assassination and stealth skills. Today, everyone had been very busy preparing for the second banquet. Some of the nobles had already begun to arrive. In their location, gathering more than 30 noble families to arrive on the exact date was difficult. As for Dane's sisters, they had already opened a teleporter gate and went back to the academy together. It couldn't be helped as they had midterm exams soon. For now, it was about time for Dane to clean up and dress up too. He made a mental note to take a closer look at the gifts his sisters gave him last night. After his intense training, Dane was tended to and dressed up. He entered the family hall with his mom and dad and mingled with various nobles. Dane had to put his etiquette training into practice the whole night as he schmoozed with high society. He was paraded around as the birthday boy. Everyone's attention was fixed on him. Finally, he managed to get out of the banquet hall and breathe. The life of a noble was a tiring one. His schedule was more packed than usual as the birthday boy, but at least he could always find solace resting in their beautiful garden. Mr. Gardner had worked hard to cultivate this special place beautifully, the kind of beauty that gives peace. Dane looked at the flowers in full bloom, exploding with their unique colors as butterflies danced around. He remembered his oldest sister lecturing him about how flowers contain the most mana in nature. Since he had a little bit of time to kill, he might as well try and analyze the mana in these flowers. Dane closed his eyes and concentrated on the natural flow of magic in the air. Without opening his eyes, he began grasping the concept his sister explained to him. He started sensing the mana in the flowers. He had been training in multiple fields all at once but had not seen any noticeable development in mage magic and summoning magic. He was having a hard time picking and choosing what fields to devote his time to. Having too many talents could be troublesome at times like this. Bro was literally suffering from success. After spending a few minutes immersed in the natural mana in the garden, he finally saw the mana in the flowers. He could not believe that such a small thing could contain such a massive, rushing mana flow. If one can feel the flow of nature and somehow make it their own, the principle could settle into the body to form a magic circle. That's precisely what is happening now. It helped a lot that his body's mana affinity had always been tremendous. He could clearly see something others could only faintly feel with their sixth sense. Just one trip to the garden had improved his perception of mana by a ton. What he could only faintly see before had become clearer. He was so close to grasping the inner workings of magic when he felt something shatter. Meanwhile, two noble kids had also found their way into the garden, bored by the chit-chat of the grown-ups in the banquet hall. They were siblings. The older redhead was just bitter that no one was paying attention to him as everyone was talking about the genius Sogra's kid. He aggressively walked on top of the bed of flowers, destroying them in the process. The red-headed siblings had lost their way into the massive garden and happened to see Dane standing around in a daze. They eyed his clothes and mistakenly assessed that Dane must be a servant and yelled at him. He did not take too kindly to this disrespectful brat. The bastard dared to order him to lead him and his brother to the exit. Dane saw what they were doing to the flowers and yelled at them to stop stomping on the plants. Red Bastard had the nerve to feel offended for being yelled at. Dane asked why they were ruining the flower bed instead of using the garden paths. Red Bastard saw that he was small and continued acting obnoxiously. Then came the flaunting of their family name as all noble brats do. Dane didn't care though. To him they just looked like a pair of brutes ruining his garden's flower bed. Red Bastard did not like being called a brute, but he acted like one and grabbed Dane by the collar. He and his brother were the sons of Count Tyron, a guest of the castle. Hearing the name of Count Tyron reminded Dane of a memory from his previous life. That guy was the noble he captured after a shameful defeat on the battlefield. He remembered Count Tyron as an irritating noble, one of those horrible bastards. Based on the behavior of the brute in front of him right now, the phrase, like father, like son, seemed perfect. Red Bastard continued flexing his family name, boasting that they were famous in the capital. He even bragged that his house could make Dane disappear without a trace, so he had better watch his mouth. Dane knew plenty of dumbasses like this kid from before. He knew that words wouldn't get through Red Bastard's thick skull filled with air. The boy raised his fist, swinging at Dane while still thinking he was just roughing up a mere servant. Dane wasn't going to let that happen though. He responded by bashing his head against Red Bastard's nose as hard as he could. It was a critical hit that nearly crushed the Red Bastard's snorter. The little brother worriedly called his big bro. He checked on Red Bastard, who slumped on the ground after being hit hard. Wiping his nose, he saw blood and started freaking out as though he had never bled before. When he saw the red in his hand, Red Bastard's blood boiled, and he threatened to kill Dane. Finding the threat amusing, our boy stood on business and dared the brat to go ahead and try. Red Bastard wanted to pay back blood with blood. His little brother had some sense in him and wanted to stop his big bro, but Red Bastard was way too arrogant to be stopped. The brute launched a punch forward, and Dane nonchalantly dodged by, jumping back. It was a mismatch through and through. Dane was way too slippery for an amateur. While he let the Red Bastard tire out, he observed that the brat's footwork was too sloppy, as if he had never held a weapon in his life. Dane considered that the bastard might be a mage or a summoner. The barrage of punches continued, none of them even coming close to hitting a single strand of Dane's hair. Red Bastard's nose continued to bleed as his patience ran thin. Dane continued playing with his enemy using his superior footwork, and an idea came to his mind. Maybe he could harness the flow of magic he saw on the flower earlier and incorporate his will into it. If he succeeded, he should be able to compress that force into a physical form. He might as well use this opportunity to test it out in combat. The bastard's little brother watched on the sidelines with his mouth wide open. Dane planted his feet on the ground and started accumulating magic in his hands. He visualized a ball of raw mana and sent it hurtling toward the brat's stomach. The force was powerful enough to send Red Bastard painfully crashing onto the grass, making a mess of the concrete on the way. He screamed in agony, his body and ego bruised. Lil Bro checked on his loser Big Bro lying on the bed of flowers. Dane was more concerned about the flower bed he had just ruined than the bastard's well-being. But the Red Bastard was tenacious. He still had enough gas in the tank to stand back up. Seeing as Dane could use magic, Red Bastard demanded to know who Dane was. Lil Bro continued trying to discourage his Big Bro to no avail. His pride was too wounded to care about any fallout or trouble. Red Bastard beckoned the mana inside his body and started opening some sort of insidious portal. Dane was surprised to see the familiar sight. This type of magic belonged to summoners. The mana swirled and coalesced together until a translucent wolf started descending to the ground. The wolf looked bloodthirsty and predatory, with its snarling sharp fangs. Red Bastard laughed maniacally as he called his summon named Genpu. He finally introduced himself as Digron Tyron, ready to show Dane the consequences of messing with someone of his stature. Dane heard the brat ordered the wolf to tear him apart, but he was unimpressed by the mere wolf summon. It certainly felt lacking, as he had gotten used to seeing his sister Claire summoning fearsome beasts like her wyvern. Digron stood far away as Genpu lunged at the unmoving Dane. He just looked at the wolf in the eye and did not budge. Genpu must have sensed that he would suffer a horrible fate if he dared to go through with the attack. So, the wolf turned its tail and did a 180 spin. Its aura visibly changed as though the aggression against Dane had totally dissipated. The Tyron brothers were dumbfounded. Digron's pride, his summon, had seemingly turned against him. Right now, the big puppy was behaving as though he was subservient to Dane. Digron yelled at his summon to rip Dane's throat and end his life, but the orders fell on deaf ears. In response, the puppy started happily wagging its tail toward Dane. Sensing no ill will from the summoned beast, Dane gave the good boy some gentle pets. Even he had no clue how this turn of events happened. Now that he thought about it, even Claire's summons had always been friendly to him. Even the wyvern played with him sometimes. At that time, he simply thought that it was due to his blood ties with his sister. But in a situation like this, where there was no familiar relation, the summoned beast still behaved in a friendly manner. This could mean that he had an abnormally high favorability to all kinds of summoned beasts, or Genpu's favorability toward his bastard summoner had hit rock bottom. Digron could not understand what was happening. He had never heard of a summon betraying their master. Dane was just winning on every front, and he continued taunting Digron to come at him. Lil Bro was practically begging his big bro to stop embarrassing himself and accept the L to no avail. Digron's pathetic ass still wanted to fight, but Lil Bro really needed this fight to be over. The poor kid, caught up by his brother's foolishness, had peed his shorts in fear. Lil Bro cried, and Digron cursed him out for being an embarrassment. Dane added salt to the wound in their pride by pointing out the bathhouse in the basement of the main castle. Digron used his little brother's accident to get out of Dodge. As if he hadn't made enough of a fool of himself already, he ordered Dane to stay in the garden. Dane just stared at the pathetic loser with disgust. Digron did not even take his summon with him. Our boy continued hanging out in the garden, experimenting with his new understanding of mana. He tried to practice a trick that Claire taught him before. He identified what was left of the faint link between that bastard Digron and Genpu. He cut that thing off and carefully overwrote the link with his own magic. In doing so, the wolf and he became officially connected. A kid who hadn't done anything close to a proper summoning managed to pull off the intricate trick by just leveraging his high favorability with summoned beasts. Now, he had officially succeeded as a summoner. While he was basking in the glory of his success, Dane heard a familiarly annoying voice seemingly looking for him. Digron Tyron, the bratty bastard, actually called his daddy and snitched that he was bullied by some kid in the garden and pointed Dane out. The coward plugged his nose holes to stop the bleeding while bitching to his dad about being knocked around by Dane and canceling the link with his summon. Big boy Mogard Tyran stepped forward and introduced himself as the head of the Tyran Count family, one of the capital's great nobles, with gusto. He asked if Dane really messed up his son's face and forcefully stole his summon. Our boy was not one to back out in front of a pig, so he stood on business and owned what he did. He noticed that Mogard Tyran looked a lot fatter now than when he captured the pig as a prisoner. Peace times must be treating him really well, even though he was a disgrace on the battlefield. Mogard continued posturing as he asserted that he could not let this matter come to pass. Messing with his kids was something he could not overlook. The pig continued with his barrage of demanding questions and finally asked the kid to reveal his identity. Our boy held his head high and formally introduced himself as Dane Sogres, the youngest son of Arkan Sogres, the Lord of the South, and the head of the Sogres Count family. Boy gave them that Game of Thrones intro. This introduction stunned the trashy father and son duo. They had unknowingly offended the fucking birthday boy. They didn't know that they were messing with the famed rising star of the South. The Duke is quite bewildered by this unexpected encounter with the youngest son of House of Sogres. Speaking of great noble houses, he recalls how he was taken prisoner by that guy Argrick and had no significant contribution in the war, leaving every great noble laughing at him. Right now, he sees this as a perfect opportunity to maneuver the situation in his favor, intending to ruin the Count Sogres' name and use that as a pretext to demand mining rights. The nobles who once looked down on him will soon be bowing before him. With that in mind, the big brain fatty turns to our boy, asking if he's the birthday boy Dane. My guy just shakes his head in response and confirms it positively. The fatty is barely holding on to his frustration, because he definitely did not come here to celebrate the birthday of some brat. He then points at his shitty son, Digron, and asks Dane how he plans to repay the humiliation he caused his son. Not only did Dane injure his son, who is a guest invited by Sogres, but he also stole their summon, which is a grave crime. The shitty son also agrees with his equally shitty father, telling Dane that this is his last day. The fatty then also threatens our boy, stating that he's going to speak with Count Sogres personally and hold him accountable for his actions. Dane just acknowledges what the fatty is saying and further states that before heading toward his father, he wants his son to apologize first. Of course, the chubster starts fuming out of his mind, asking what the hell he's talking about, while his son grits his teeth in anger as well. But Dane makes it clear that while it's true he hit his son and hurt him, it was all in self-defense against a threat to his life. Plus, he emphasizes that he didn't steal their summon. Genpu chose to follow him. The trash son quickly pipes up, claiming that there's no way Genpu would do that, and tells his father that Dane is lying. That's when the father takes a moment to reflect. He recalls hearing that the second daughter of House Sogres is a genius summoner, so he's sure there's a good chance that girl taught Dane how to forcibly cut off a link between familiar and master. The chubster keeps going back and forth with our boy, while Dane can't help but feel like this is such a drag. Eventually, Mogard decides to simmer down, because after yapping for so long, his jaw is literally hurting. He tells Dane that he won't scold him any longer, and decides they should go see what Count Sogres has to say about the situation. With the speak of the devil, the Count himself arrives on the scene, accompanied by Duke Thermion. Of course, both the trash son and his father are absolutely boggled to see Count Sogres. And what's even more mind-boggling for them is that Duke Thermion is here too. As night descends, we see the red-headed boy giving his testimony to the Count about how he just got lost in the garden with his little brother, which is why he asked Dane to guide them. He continues yapping and making up stories, while Dane stands behind him nonchalantly, thinking how his father is actually listening to this guy yap. I guess that's not surprising to him, given how Count Sogres cares deeply about his family and its reputation. He's not the type to be biased toward any one side. Even in conflicts with outsiders, he can tell right from wrong. After finishing his story, the red-headed boy wraps up by stating that all of a sudden, Dane headbutted him and kept using this weird technique to mock him. He claims that to scare Dane off, he called out to his summon, but Dane just stole his summon from him and tried to attack back. Once Digron is done speaking, Mogard steps up, telling the Count that he only intended to give Dane a warning. However, he insists that stealing someone's summon is clearly wrong, and he simply can't let that part slide. Finally, Count Sogres also speaks up, letting Mogard know that he won't roll on his judgment just after hearing one side of this quarrel. He wants to hear what Dane has to say, then assess the whole situation before drawing a judgment. He also reassures Mogard that if he's worried about any biased judgments, Duke Thermion will also give his opinion on the matter. The Duke quickly smirks and states that if this is that important, he can handle it. Mogard feels frustrated as his face sweats profusely. He knows he's about to get screwed. Getting Thermion involved is only going to complicate things further, and he's not feeling good about it. Count Sogres gives the green light to his son to explain himself, and Dane braces himself, claiming that what Mogard's son said wasn't entirely accurate, but some of it is actually true. He then explains that the flowers they grew with such care in their garden were stepped on as he pleased. So he only told Mogard's son to get out of there, which made Mograd's son angry and started the fight. Of course, both Fatty and his son are absolutely awestruck after hearing these brutal truth bombs, with the son even trying to deny it by calling Dane a liar. But the Count tells Dane to continue, so our boy further explains that when Mogard's son summoned Genpu, his command was to kill him. He also clarifies that he didn't steal his summon. Rather, Genpu came to him first and saw his goodwill. The Duke is utterly bewildered to see how fluently this 7-year-old is speaking, with such grace and a proper choice of words. Dane, on the other hand, confirms once again that he never stole anyone's summon. Mogard loses his cool, stomping his feet on the ground and calling it nonsense. He claims it's impossible for a summon to submit to someone who isn't even a summoner, insisting that Dane must have used some shady technique to pull it off. But not surprisingly, Dane informs Mogard that he possesses an innate affinity with summons, and a summon that isn't close enough to its master could submit to someone like him as well. Mogard refuses to believe it, while our boy simply states that this is actually true. Mogard's face looks like he's going through serious constipation, and he just says that this kid is just making things up. The Duke then chimes in, suggesting they should just be able to prove it with a summon. Count Sogres turns to his son, asking if he can prove it, to which Dane agrees. Meanwhile, Mogard shoots a death glare at his son for putting him in this hot mess, while the bratty son feels sure he's about to get screwed by his father, as he has no idea what he'll do if he fails to summon Genpu. Once the bratty son tries to summon Genpu, he utterly fails, prompting his father to yell at him, just as expected. On the other hand, Dane just smirks, thinking about how he has already severed the connection, so of course there's no way the boy could summon Genpu back. Dane then decides to demonstrate himself by summoning Genpu, but adds that in order to do that, he needs a sign that Mogard's son possesses. The bratty son gets angry, questioning the audacity of Dane demanding his sign. He yaps a lot of nonsense, but Count Sogres cuts him off, reminding him that according to their own words, even if Dane uses the sign, he shouldn't be able to summon Genpu. So, there's no harm in trying. Mogard sweats as he has no option other than to give the sign, so he reluctantly tells his bratty son, Digron, to hand it over. The redhead nearly teeters on the brink of tears, but his father just tells him to hurry up. Once Dane has the sign in his hand, he starts his mojo, and he also reveals to us that since a summon sign has a summoner's unique code name engraved on it, no one else is usually able to use it. However, Genpu, which Digron summoned, was imbued with his mana, so the summon sign is just a vehicle, and Genpu has already connected with him. As soon as he calls out to Genpu, the monster appears and starts licking his cheeks. The Count and the Duke are both in awe, while Mogard and Digron tremble after getting exposed for lying. The Duke finds it amazing and wonders if Dane was not also learning spearmanship. His father confirms this, but admits he isn't entirely sure about his son's abilities either. The Chubster, on the other hand, realizes he's screwed, as his entire plan has backfired. The Count then turns to him, asking if he acknowledges that Dane is telling the truth. The fatty quickly tries to play it cool, laughing it off while admitting that they perhaps mistook Dane for stealing their summon. He also concedes that his son wasn't truly trying to kill Dane, and he asks his bratty son if that's right. Digron trembles but nods along with his father, saying he was just trying to scare Dane off. But our boy is furious to see these bastards trying to weasel out of accountability so easily. Before the two seniors can roll their final verdict on the matter, a lady strolls into the scene, startling everyone present, especially Dane, who is wide-eyed to see Layla. As soon as she saunters into the scene, she claims that what Digron is saying is not true. Her father quickly asks what brings her here, and she responds that she happened to hear his voice while taking a walk. Before continuing the conversation, she promptly greets the fatty and Count Sogres. The fatty stutters in surprise as he tries to reciprocate with her gesture, clearly taken aback by the unexpected encounter with the Duke's daughter. Count Sogres then quickly gets to the point and asks her about her claim that Digron was lying. She confidently confirms this, saying she indeed overheard their conversation earlier during her stroll. Digron starts to lose his cool at the thought of her having heard everything, because that is definitely not good news for him. She then goes on to explain all the juicy details, and my guy can't help but smirk at this unexpected twist that somehow turned in his favor. A while later, the fatty tells his trashy son to hurry up and apologize to Count Sogres. The son quickly mumbles, saying he was wrong, but the Count tells him to apologize to Dane instead, not him. The Chubster quickly shoves his son towards Dane, telling him to apologize quickly. The bratty son looks uncomfortable, and hesitates before stuttering out a weak, half-hearted sorry. Dane, however, is far from satisfied. He can tell the apology is insincere, just some obligatory gesture because his lie got caught after a third-party witness stepped in. Dane doesn't really want to accept this lame apology, but thinking back to his past experiences, he decides to be the bigger person. Instead of being stubborn, he decides shows some generosity. With that in mind, Dane accepts the bratty son's apology, and the kid lights up with happiness, eagerly thanking our boy for letting him slide. Meanwhile, the fatty father also lets out a sigh of relief, realizing how close he was to losing everything. On the other hand, the Duke, who might just be Dane's future father-in-law, can't help but to think how he already knew Dane was a special kid. After all, he could have easily been stubborn about the whole thing, considering the opposing party was clearly in the wrong from the start. Finally, the Count makes it clear that since Dane accepted the apology, there won't be any further arguing about the incident. However, he emphasizes that he had no intention of letting this slide, especially since Daigron attacked Dane in order to kill him. The fatty father starts sweating bullets after seeing the Count so fired up about the situation. As he tries to speak up, the Count tells him to shut his yap and orders him to take his family and leave the castle immediately. The news shakes the fatty's world to its core. If he's thrown out now, his reputation will be shattered, and he's desperate to remain in the castle no matter what it takes. He desperately grabs the Count's hand and starts begging for forgiveness, claiming he'll do anything Sogris asks of him, but he just wants him to forgive him this one time. But the Count quickly yanks his hand away, making it clear he has no need for the fatty. He tells him that soldiers will be arriving shortly to officially escort him out. With that, he starts storming out of the scene with his son, leaving the fatty behind, who is desperately begging for forgiveness. Sogris also tells Duke Thermion it's time to go, and Duke promptly calls for his little girl as they start walking away. As they stroll off, Dane turns his head back to look at them, feeling satisfied that they're getting what they deserve. After all, they started this whole mess, so it's only fair they reap what they sow. Anyway, he learned something important today, which is that his father can be quite scary when he's in angry mode. Duke Thermion then asks him if it's true that he defeated that bratty son of Mogard with a mana bullet, and Dane quickly confirms it. The Duke then can't help but point out how talented Dane is, not just in spear fighting but also in summoning and magic. It's truly outstanding, and he's sure that history has never seen such talent before. The proud father flashes a grin, saying he's also proud to have such an exceptional son. Meanwhile, Dane is just soaking up all the praise while Layla is freaking out, struggling to believe what she's hearing. Duke Thermion then points out that while talent is one thing, Dane is also incredibly calm. Most kids tend to get agitated during fights, and they stubbornly insist that they are in the right, but Dane doesn't do that. The Duke has no doubt that this boy will grow up to be a fine man. The father quickly gives Dane a gentle pat on the head, saying it's too early to tell for sure. They'll have to wait until he's all grown up to see how things turn out. He also points out that it's all thanks to Layla that the incident was resolved peacefully. Without her testimony, things could have turned really ugly. Once Duke Thermion hears this, he's quite surprised that Sogris have such a positive view of Layla. He does not let this opportunity go to waste and tries to downplay her role in the incident, suggesting that if the Count acknowledges her so much, maybe they should start discussing their marriage. Of course, Sogris is startled to hear this, and he can see how eager the Duke is to marry his daughter. To dodge the bullet, he quickly shifts the conversation, noting that the sun is already setting and it's almost time for the banquet. With that, he bolts out of the scene, telling them that he will meet them in the hall. Thermion then also tells his daughter to take her time heading back with Dane. He quickly starts running after the Count, mentioning he wants to have a little chat with him, leaving the two kids behind. As they walk, Layla turns to our boy and asks why the summoned ignored its summoner and obeyed him instead. She claims she's seen famous summoners duel many times in the capital but has never witnessed anything like this. Dane shrugs and admits he's not sure either. It just kind of happened. Of course, Layla pouts annoyingly to see that Dane is intentionally hiding the truth, even though she's the one who helped him get out of that mess. But my guy remains nonchalant and reminds her that he also helped her, bringing up the time when he assisted her with her swordsmanship. Layla thinks back to that moment and reluctantly agrees that he's right. Finally, Dane decides that since they've helped each other once, they can do it again. He tells her she's free to ask him anything. Right away, the girl perks up in excitement as she exclaims that she wants to learn it right now. Dane is startled by her impatience and wonders what could be so urgent to learn. He asks her what she wants to learn, and she quickly tells him to teach her how to use a mana bullet. Dane asks her why she's so eager to learn the mana bullet, and Layla quickly responds that she wants to grow stronger and faster. She hopes to form at least 2 mana cores before entering the academy. Dane wonders why she's in such a rush since she's still so young. He gets the answer for his confusion as soon as she reveals that she wants to grow up quickly to make her mother happy. Her mother loves her a lot, and Layla is certain that becoming stronger would make her proud. Hearing her mention her mother, Dane recalls hearing adults talk about Countess Thermion being bedridden. With that in mind, I guess he has no choice but to help her. Layla bursts into a happy little dance and declares she's ready to start training tomorrow, though she would not mind starting training from tonight as well, especially since she is not sure how long she is going to stay here in the mansion. Dane just shakes his head and tells her she can start whenever she wants. He assures her that once she understands the flow of magic, learning the mana bullet won't be too difficult. Layla then eagerly asks what he'll want in return for teaching her. Dane falls silent, which makes it pretty clear that the request he has in his mind won't be as easy as just showing someone how to use magic bullets. The scene then transitions back to the banquet hall, where guests are whispering and murmuring among themselves about that fat father Tyron. They've heard that Count Tyron got kicked out of the castle, and they're all wondering what he did to deserve that. Some guests mention that Tyron's eldest son caused some kind of incident by picking a fight with the young master Dane and ended up getting taught a lesson. They chuckle among themselves, amused at the thought of the fat cat coming here only to be humiliated and embarrassed. Word has also spread that young Master Dane is an outstanding summoner. One guest wonders if that means the Sogra's house will now be a prestigious summoner house. However, another chimes in, saying that's not all. Young Master Dane can also use magic, which is something they're having a hard time believing. We then see this big mustachioed man introducing himself to Dane as Baron Opent. He asks our boy if he happens to know anything about the Opent territory in the east. Dane humbly bows his head in respect and replies that he's heard the territory is famously known for its grilled trout and sapphires. The man laughs heartily while admitting that Dane is absolutely right. He goes on to say that the Opent house's trout and sapphires are the best on the continent. He then shoves his daughter forward, saying he almost forgot to introduce her. The girl steps forward and introduces herself as Sylvia Opent and politely greets him. Dane is startled to see her and nervously reciprocates with her gestures and gives his own name. I have no clue why he is so nervous around her, but it looks like we are about to soon find out. She dashes toward him with a mischievous look on her face and whispers that she's heard he's the one inheriting House Sogres in the future. Dane fumbles out an unsure response, and Sylvia enthusiastically tells him to stop feigning ignorance. She claims that she has heard he's talented in many ways, and bluntly tells him that she will be under his care from now on, especially since there's a possibility they might become family in the future. And there it is. Dane's nervousness around her makes total sense now. This girl is just too direct, and she didn't even hesitate for a second. Right at that moment, Layla joins the scene while Sylvia is still in the middle of shaking hands with Dane. Not surprisingly, Sylvia gets startled to see a potential rival, while Layla is practically throwing daggers towards our boy with her sharp eyes and demanding to know who this lady is. Sylvia recognizes Layla right away and greets her warmly, introducing herself as the eldest daughter of Baron Opent. Layla tries to reciprocate with a gesture, but the anger on her face makes it clear she's far from happy, even though she says it's nice to meet Sylvia. The two ladies exchange smiles that are practically dripping with killing intent. Watching them reminds Dane of a memory, and he can tell that both girls are absolutely ready to throw down. Eventually, Layla grabs his hand and states that she's borrowing him for now since they already had an appointment. She shoots him a death glare as she asks if he remembers their plans. Of course, poor Dane has no clue what she's talking about, but he agrees anyway, apologizing to Sylvia and promising they'll talk again later. Sylvia forces a smile and tells him that they'll definitely talk later. As Layla leads Dane away, Sylvia can't help but feel annoyed how this girl just took him right from her hands. Layla, on the other hand, still hasn't simmered down either. She's absolutely annoyed at the audacity of that girl trying to take Dane from her. Dane finds himself startled under Layla's piercing gaze. He can't help but lament that the darling daughter of the Duke, who holds the second most power in the capital after the Emperor, is no match for the young lady of the Eastern Baron. So it's no surprise that Sylvia just gave up like that. Once Dane and Layla are outside, she starts grilling him about his connection to Sylvia. She wonders if there's a chance he might get engaged to her, but my guy quickly dismisses any such relationship, insisting they were just greeting each other. Layla lights up at the thought, and even Dane can see her mood shift instantly. After walking for a short while, they finally arrive at the secret spot only Dane knows about. He's confident that they won't be bothered by anyone here. As soon as they step inside this hidden place, Layla lights up and begins doing a happy dance, thrilled to see such a beautiful location. She's also relieved that no one will know if they do anything here. Dane agrees, saying she's absolutely right. This is a great place to train. But before starting the practice, he wonders if she's ever felt mana before. Layla admits that she has a little, though it's not enough to form a mana core. She mentions that she's tried to intake mana by breathing it in. Her explanation reminds Dane that she's not at the emission stage yet. He learned to feel mana naturally on the battlefield, so he's amazed that a ducal house would teach her this. He decides to start with something simpler, and tells her that the first step is to feel the mana she's taking in. Layla looks a bit confused by this, so Dane explains that if she wants to expel mana from her body, she needs to learn to control the mana inside her first. The most important part is imagination. He instructs her to close her eyes and imagine the mana swirling within her. However, after a few moments, she tries but there's literally nothing happening. Dane can see by the look on her face that she didn't quite understand the instructions. Layla tries again, but once more, nothing happens. Frustrated, she complains to Dane about why it's not working. Dane reassures her that this is normal for her first attempt, and tells her to focus again. Meanwhile, Count Sogris is sneaking a peek at the two kids. He can't help but feel proud that his son is already teaching someone, even though he's still so young. It truly makes him believe that Dane has grown. Just then, Duke Thermion sneaks up on Sogris and asks him what in the world he's doing there. Sogris' heart nearly skips a beat at the sudden question, but the Duke quickly tells him there's no need to be startled, and asks if he's watching two lovebirds enjoying some alone time together. Count Sogris raises an eyebrow and asks what he means by lovebirds, and besides, how did he even get here? The Duke chuckles at the thought that Count was actually trying to hide in here. He then reminds Sogris how he did a pretty sloppy job of sneaking around, especially since his wife is the Empire's legendary assassin. Poor Sogris has no clue what to say after being caught red-handed sneaking around, while the Duke playfully berates him, reminding him that if the castle's owner goes around peeping on others' affairs, people will speak ill of him. Naturally, the doting father gets annoyed and defensively says that he was just following his son. The Duke chuckled upon hearing this, and couldn't help but point out that he was also just following his daughter. Turns out both of these fathers are hopeless. They stand there, side by side, acting like a couple of teenagers trying to ogle at their kids' interactions as if they were peeping at ladies outside a school gate. Meanwhile, back with the kids, Dane opens up his dimensional pouch, and the girl is quite fascinated to see that he already owns something like this. When Dane mentions that his eldest sister made it for him and gave it as a present recently, Layla starts to feel jealous. Unlike him, her older brothers stopped paying attention to her once they entered the academy. He then pulls out a mirror from the dimensional pouch, and the girl casually asks what they're going to do with it. He explains that he brought it just in case it could help. It's easier to picture something in her mind while looking at a mirror instead of relying on imagination alone. He tells the curious girl to stand in front of the mirror so she can get a full view of herself. The girl quickly positions herself in front of the mirror and starts doing the magic limbo again. This time, Dane can tell she's being quite serious about it. She takes a deep breath while both doting fathers quietly squat down on the ground, as if they're taking Indian-style dump. Duke can't help but point out that Lilia seems to be taking a liking to Dane. Sogris asks if it's really that way, and Duke explains that it is, because it's unusual for Lilia to get along with someone so easily. Sogris asks if that's really the case since she seems like a bright child. Duke Thermion remains quiet for a moment before speaking up, saying she's only bright on the outside, and he can't say the same for what's inside. He explains that after her brothers left for the academy, her mother became bedridden, so they haven't been able to be together like before. This situation has made it difficult for her to open up to others, and that's what's been happening. The Count points out that if he knows everything already, then why is he always acting so cold toward his daughter? Thermion is genuinely moved that the Count noticed something like this and admits he's doing it on purpose. He explains that when he raised his sons, he showered them with attention, and they grew up spoiled rotten. But Sogris reminds him not to assume that Lilia will turn out the same way. She'll be hurt if she finds out, and now it makes sense why she asked Dane for help instead of her father. Thermion then points a finger at his friend, teasing him about still nagging like the old days, but the Count quickly asks when he ever did that, especially since what he said is the truth. Duke changes the subject, asking when he plans to send his son to the capital. He suggests that if he's sending him over, Ducal House will wholeheartedly open his doors and let him stay in the ducal castle. Sogris goes quiet and glances back at his kid, and after seeing him happy, he just says that he'll do as Dane wishes. He's free to choose his path, just like his older sisters. We also notice Miss Sogris watching both doting fathers, clearly embarrassed by how shamelessly they're peeking around. But eventually, she just smiles, realizing that the love they have for their children holds a strange power over them. She decides not to ruin the mood, and pretends she didn't see anything. Back with the kids, Lilia thanks Dane for his help and calls him a real genius. She admits that while everyone around her calls her a genius, she feels like weak sauce compared to him. While Dane nonchalantly looks around to see if both fathers have quietly left, he assures her that this is only the beginning, and she'll definitely grow stronger too. She then asks him if he's going to the academy, since it's the only place where all of the Empire's geniuses gather. To that, he says he's not sure yet, and he isn't convinced that he needs to go there since he can get pretty strong just by training alone. The girl starts to berate him for his narrow thinking, and reminds him that attending the academy for studying isn't everything. It's the gateway to forming his noble faction, and it's the best way to build connections from a young age. Dane is amazed that she's actually pretty smart for a 7-year-old, and understands how the real world works. He finally responds to her argument, saying he already knows about that, but he's just not interested in going to the academy yet. There's a mountain of books he hasn't read in the library, and he still has a lot to learn from his parents. Lilia acknowledges that this is true, but asks if he doesn't want to play with other kids his age, especially since she heard his older sisters are both attending the academy too. It seems like Dane is running out of arguments against her persistence, so he tries to brush her off by saying he's thinking of going in the future if he feels like it. She then tells him to visit her house once he plans to go to the capital, and that's how they promise to meet again. Speaking of meeting again, she remembers to ask him when he's going to make his request now that he has taught her how to use mana bullets. He simply shakes his head and states that he'll tell her when he goes to the capital. This shocks her, and she lets out a screeching roar of disbelief. Probably she is shocked that he is going to the capital after all. Finally, the day of her departure arrives. As Lilia's carriage starts rolling down the road, Dane looks at a stone-like object in his hand that was given to him by his future father-in-law. The scene transitions back to the moment when the Duke handed him this mysterious object. When Dane asks what it is, the father-in-law replies that it's his birthday present and hopes he'll like it. He further reveals that the symbols of their Thermian house are revenge, the sword, and the blacksmith, and the history of the house began with their progenitor, who was a blacksmith. Thanks to him, their house has the best forge in the Empire, in fact the best forge on the entire continent. All of the Thermian-made weapons that protect the Empire were crafted in that forge. Of course, our boy already knows all this because, according to his past knowledge, all the ores in the world can be found at that forge, and all sorts of mystical weapons and artifacts are created in the greatest forge on the continent. The father-in-law then reveals that if Dane presents the insignia at the forge, they will create a weapon of his choice for him. That's when we finally learn that this rock-like object is essentially an insignia, a certified check that proves the honor and skills of whoever holds it. Count Sogris is absolutely boggled when he sees the Duke giving away such a precious insignia, something even the imperial family desires. The Duke simply pats his son-in-law on the head and tells him to grow well and help his father. His potential wife waves a last goodbye to him, and that's how they part ways. In the present moment, his mother squats down next to him, and after seeing his dejected face, she asks if he's upset that they left. He admits he is, saying she was practically his first friend. His mother reassures him that once he goes to the capital, he'll be able to meet her again and will even become more handsome, which will surely impress her. Well, I guess his mother is right, since he can't stay here forever, and he will have plenty of opportunities to see her again in the future. So he wishes her well until they meet again. Meanwhile, as the Duke travels in his carriage, his mind is still occupied with thoughts of Dane. He finds it strange that every time he looks at him, he is reminded of that warrior, Argyric, who showed the ability of a triple-class warrior at a young age. He's sure that if Argyric were still alive, he could have become one of the Hexa-class knights of the Drenic Empire. That's why he hopes to see Dane again when he has grown stronger. A few days later, we see our boy sitting alone before the egg. He's been feeding it mana every morning and evening and is now wondering if it's too early for it to hatch. This egg holds a mysterious familiar, and even if someone isn't a summoner, they can instill the egg with their mana and imprint themselves as the master before it hatches, allowing them to control a summon that usually only sticks around temporarily. He knows that the quality of his mana needs to match his familiar, and there are probably many tricky conditions that haven't been fulfilled yet. He's heard that some eggs never hatch because their conditions are never met, so he hopes that's not the case here. Even though he changes the flow and strength of his mana, there's still no reaction. After putting in a lot of effort once again, he puts the egg back, thinking that he's just being greedy by hoping he would succeed in one go. Suddenly the butler comes out at the gate, asking Dane if he's ready. At that very moment, the egg begins to react and starts making noises. Dane quickly rushes toward the egg, certain he just heard something. The butler also bursts into the room, asking about the noise. Dane tells him to wait a moment while he checks the egg first. However, once again, he finds himself disappointed, realizing he was just excited for nothing, because he can't feel anything different. The butler asks if the egg showed a reaction, to which Dane replies no, saying he probably just imagined it. Once he finally gets into the training hall, he practices his swordsmanship first. After noticing his perfect movements, the butler is quite happy and excited. He claps as he asks since when he learned swordsmanship. Dane just brushes it off, saying he just wanted to swing the sword around a little. The butler showers him with praise, calling him a genius who is even talented with the sword. As he looks at the sword, Dane then reflects on how learning to use a new weapon, like the spear, was fun, but he also wanted to draw a sword. Sadly, he hadn't been able to hold a sword during all that time since his father always watched him so closely. Thankfully, he's glad he hasn't lost his touch with it. The butler quickly dashes off to grab some snacks, and brings back an entire tray of delicacies, telling Dane to munch on something before diving back into his training. Meanwhile, we zoom in on Count Sogris, who's staring out the window, lost in thought. He's been feeling a bit worn out by throwing this banquet every year, but at least he's learned through this banquet that a lot of nobles are paying attention to the south. Most of them are eager to forge a good relationship with him, which is a nice change. Ever since the war wrapped up, the South has been sitting pretty with its great climate and all the luxury that nobles just can't resist. So maybe their interest should have been obvious from the start. Still, even with all this interest, it pales in comparison to the attention Dane is getting. You see, the conflicts with the eldest son of Count Tyron were beyond Sogras's expectations, but Dane handled the situation maturely. He calmly and logically laid everything out in front of the adults, which was super impressive, and he even confidently proved his talent. He can't help but think that his son is just a bit too mature for his age. Sometimes he wishes Dane would act a little more like the other kids and let loose a bit. As the clock ticks closer to the training hour, he knows it's time to head to the training hall. He pulls out the legendary spear, Dragontail, and decides to have Dane swing it around a bit today. But as soon as he steps onto the grounds with the spear in hand, he freezes when he spots Dane swinging his sword instead. Now he's curious about why the sword. His mind thinks back and he's convinced that damn Duke must have said something to him. Otherwise, there's no way Dane would be wielding a sword after all that spear training. He just stands there, watching his son pull off all these cool stunts with the sword. Seriously, Dane looks like he knows what he's doing. The strength he's displaying is something even seasoned sword fighters would have a hard time matching. It makes his father wonder since when did he learn all this. But one thing is for sure, that Dane is definitely talented with a sword too. He finally calls out to his son, asking just when he learned all those impressive moves. Well, it looks like Dane's long-held secret is finally out of the bag, so he decides it's probably best to tell his dad the truth. He admits he didn't actually learn any of it. Hearing this just leaves his father even more perplexed, leaving him wondering if this is yet another hidden talent of his. He starts to think out loud about how Dane already knows spearmanship, magic, assassination, summoning, and now swordsmanship too. He adds that if he were someone else, he wouldn't believe a child could show talent in all these fields. Then he asks Dane if he's curious about the world beyond their walls. Dane looks a bit confused, not really sure what his dad is getting at. The father then tells him that if he wants to explore what's out there, he should go for it. He genuinely believes this country might be too small for his son's vast talent, and if he stays cooped up here, he'll be the one missing out. Dane feels a wave of sadness wash over him as he realizes his father has come to terms with the fact that he can't hold on to him forever. So, he finally says he'd be glad to learn about the world outside. His dad smiles at this and quickly gets to the point, telling him that it's finally time to prepare his son to go out into the real world. He admits it's a bit bittersweet to see his son go, but he knows he has to respect Dane's desires. Then, he presents the spear to him, saying he brought something extra special today. It doesn't take long for Dane to realize what it is, and his dad clears up any lingering doubts by reminding him that this is Dragontail, the spear that reacted to him on his first birthday. He extends his hand, encouraging Dane to take it. The moment Dane picks up the spear, it starts to react, and he can feel an incredible surge of power coursing through the weapon. His dad chuckles, saying it's reacting way stronger than when he was just 1 year old, and honestly, who could blame him for that? He then proudly tells his son that he plans to make him master the spear before he heads out, so he better be ready. He promises Dane that one day, Dragontail will be his, but first, he needs to grow strong enough to wield it with pride. Dane eagerly promises to work hard and honor his father's teachings. Later, back in his room, Dane's mind is buzzing with thoughts about the outside world. He's always been curious about it, even during those long days on the battlefield. As a soldier, all he really knew was war, setting up camp, cleaning his weapons, eating bland food, and gearing up for the next battle. The only way out was for the war to end, or for him to die in battle, and honestly, it felt like those were his only options. But now, with the chance to live a normal life ahead of him, he can hardly imagine what life outside the battlefield could be like. Still, as Dane, he knows he has to embrace this opportunity. He has no clue how his talents will be used, how the world will accept him, or what he can achieve out there. But for the first time, he has the chance to travel, explore, and accomplish anything he sets his mind to. At first, all he wanted was to stay and enjoy the warmth of this place. But thanks to his dad's question, his thoughts have shifted, and he's finally made up his mind to venture outside, and he's feeling pretty excited about it. Just as he is thinking about this, his mother pops into his room, which leaves him startled for a moment. He asks her when she entered the room, and this crazy assassin lady reminds him that he was so deep in thought that he didn't even hear her knock. I can tell that she is blatantly lying, given she is an assassin and snuck into his room quietly. She then asks if he's really curious about the world outside the country, and he responds positively, saying his dad mentioned it would be a waste of his talent to stay here. After thinking for a moment, he admits he's curious about the outside world too. He then starts to apologize to his mother, but she embraces him, saying there's nothing to apologize for. He reminds her that his sisters aren't here, and he's worried about leaving for the outside world too. The lady reassures him that she's fine with it because she knows just how amazing his talents are. She adds that even if he didn't want to go, the outside world would eventually call to him. She admits it would be wonderful if he could stay longer with his mother, but the world won't let him do that. So she encourages him to go and chase after what he wants to do. He promises that even if he leaves home, he'll return often to tell her everything he sees in the world. The mother thanks him and says it looks like she finally needs to teach him before sending him out into the world, just like his father is about to teach him. As he wonders aloud what kind of teaching she is talking about, the mother excitedly babbles about teaching him everything related to assassination. She goes on and on about all the skills and knowledge she has, and Dane can't help but think this is going to lead to some seriously exhausting days before he even steps outside. All in all, she tells him she'll be teaching him a ton of things, and he assures her he'll do his best to learn. As he looks at her, he can't help but think about how he'll get special lessons from his mother, filled with love. Many years have passed, and the scene then transitions to the southern region of the Altheon Empire, Sogris County, a place known for its warm climate and abundant natural resources. This place has become a cornerstone of the empire, helping them stay strong during the war. Thanks to Count Sogris's magnanimous rule, it's a region filled with peace and warmth. Finally, with the war coming to an end, the few small rebel forces have all been captured, bringing about an era of lasting peace for everyone. On a bright day, people are buzzing with chatter about how young Master Dane visited one of the shops recently. They can't stop talking about how the shopkeeper's eldest daughter literally fainted when she saw him. The ladies gossip among themselves, saying he's becoming more handsome by the day, and they wish they could catch a glimpse of his face at least once. There's even a rumor floating around that he's still single, which gives them a glimmer of hope. But one friend quickly reminds them that he's only 14 and tells her friend to stop drooling over an underage boy. One of the ladies then mentions that there are rumors Dane doesn't seem like a 14-year-old at all. He's already as tall as Count Sogris. Some even say he could easily be mistaken for a 20-year-old. All right, enough of the gossip, and let's see for ourselves how our boy has grown. For that, we transition to the outskirts of Sogris County, an area infused with ancient magic, known as the Forest of the Last Days. Here, Dane is on a special mission assigned by his mother, Lily Sogris. We catch a glimpse of him holding a spear in one hand, and in the other, some kind of cloth, probably a map or something else. I'm not really sure. Whatever it is, he's already figured out his course. With just 3 hours left before sunset, he knows he needs to get out of the forest before the sun goes down. He begins his journey, jumping through the forest with the agility of a ninja. The most important thing in this mission is not getting caught by his enemies. During this time, Dane needs to dodge the traps and nests set up by his mother and escape from the forest, which is filled with all sorts of other dangers. After leaping around for a while, he finally lands back on the ground. He takes a deep breath, soaking in the air and energy of his surroundings, holding it for a moment before letting it out again. Once he prioritizes stealth and assimilates with the surroundings, he starts to notice hidden traps revealing themselves. Right now, he spots these thin, nearly transparent strings crisscrossing the area. He knows that all the traps will activate as soon as he touches these strings. It's a basic mechanism, but that's also what makes it the most dangerous. But thankfully for him, this one looks easy to disarm. The rat-like monsters quickly pop up in the clearing, and as soon as they see Dane standing there, they don't waste a single moment before lunging at him to attack. It turns out this is a whole pack, and he definitely wasn't expecting them to show up here. What's even more concerning is that the entire pack is charging at him at a pretty scary speed. Before they hit the strings and trigger the traps, he needs to deal with them quickly, but then he hesitates, because touching the trap accidentally could be even more dangerous. Still, there's no time to waste, and he needs to get out of here. He starts dashing away, and as soon as the rats trigger the traps, sharp needles spring from all directions, catching those unfortunate rats that fell for the setup. It seems like luring the rats into the trap was part of his plan all along, and he's relieved they fell for it, saving him the trouble of dealing with them directly. But then he spots one particular rat that is not dead yet. After closing the distance, the monster leaps right at him. Dane continued going toe-to-toe with the remaining Roosevelt beast. He struggled with the vermin's speed as it almost caught up to his own. The overgrown rat hit the brakes and pivoted for another attack. This time, it used its long-range weapon, spitting out a bizarre substance from its mouth. Dane carefully assessed the situation as the substance homed in on him. He did not know what it was, but the substance certainly felt dangerous. He spun his spear and dispelled the attack effectively. The young man gritted his teeth as he knew that he couldn't afford to waste any more time fighting this chunky rat. Defending would only cost him precious time, so it was time to turn the tables and attack. A blue aura started coalescing around his body as he locked in on his target. With a viciously swift chain of moves, Dane displayed his impressive spearman technique. He moved his body freely in the air while flawlessly tracking the enemy's position. It resulted in the Russelt's head being sliced in half with a clean cut. Dane did not even bother looking back at the result of his attack. He just bolted out of there and continued his mission. By sundown, he had reached the end point of the trial. He was thoroughly exhausted, huffing and puffing for air as he tried his best not to throw up. At least he had finally escaped the forest and all its horrors. Suddenly, he felt a ferocious presence coming out of the woods and worried that his struggle wasn't done yet. He hurriedly stood up and regretted letting his guard down to rest. Just when he was about to confront the presence, he stopped in his tracks. It was just his mother, Lily. She had intentionally leaked her presence to test how Dane would react, and he passed. Also, his total runtime traversing the forest was 3 hours and 30 minutes, even faster than Lily's record. She had been watching him the whole time. A mother can't just leave her child alone in such a dangerous place after all. Lily knew better than anyone just how talented her son really was. But as a mother, it's a little different. And through this trial that Dane practically aced, Lily could not find a single fault in his survival skills and adaptability. She grabbed Dane's cheeks lovingly and asserted that he might get scouted as an assassin at the rate of his improvement. To commemorate his successful run, Lily took out her prized possession as the Empire's greatest assassin, her dagger. She reckoned that the weapon would fit her son better now. From now on, Dane would own the Nighthorn. Lily gladly passed the legendary weapon to her boy, as she wouldn't be using it anyway. Nighthorn was created from the mysterious ethereal ore, an ore that could take the elements of any object. If he wished, he could use it to store all the poisons in the world. In doing so, he could mix and absorb poison for his own use. Dane sincerely thanked his mother for such a precious inheritance, and swore to treat Nighthorn well. This also marked the end of his assassin training from his mom. Just as they were preparing to head out and go back home, the mother and son duo heard a guttural scream nearby. It seemed to have come from the depths of the forest, so they decided to check it out. We jumped forward to a few days later, inside the walls of the Sogres County Annex Tower. In one of the guest rooms, a man woke up coughing and screaming in horror. He had long, flowing white hair and a beard, and he seemed utterly confused. The mysterious man struggled to catch his breath after waking up from his slumber. He finally looked around the lavish room and wondered where he was. The last thing he remembered was eating a mushroom in that damned forest. The door creaked open, and out came Dane carrying some water. He warned the man not to move too much, as he was still undergoing detoxification. Dane explained that the old man must have mistakenly eaten a poisonous red-nosed mushroom. Fortunately, Dane and Lily had found and saved him in time. The old man recalled seeing those red-nosed mushrooms. He didn't think they would be so deadly. If Dane and Lily had arrived even a little later, the old man would have been a rotting corpse by now. Dane handed the man a cup of water, knowing how parched he must be. The young man carefully observed the strange old head. He saw a belt that had the insignia of the Nixian magic tower in the old man's possession. He was definitely not an ordinary person. If it wasn't for Nighthorn absorbing the poison raging in his body, the old man would have died. Now that the old head had calmed down a little, he asked Dane where they were, and the young man honestly stated that they were in Sogres County's Annex Tower. The old man must have gotten lost in the southern region. He was poisoned by those damned mushrooms and walked all the way south. Dane advised that he should take it easy for now and wait for the Count to come and see him soon. The young man also introduced himself as the youngest son of Count Sogres, Dane Sogres. Old Head lit up with interest as he knew of Arabella Sogres, the genius being eyed by every magic tower in the Empire. Dane also explained that they found the old man in the forest in the middle of his training with his mom. The old man almost spat out the water he was drinking after hearing that. That crazy forest gave him hell. Even as an 8-chain mage, he lost his way, and the flow of his mana reversed while casting a spell, wrecking his whole body. The entire forest held ancient mana all over the place, and then there were those undetectable traps scattered throughout the area. The forest belonged to the Sogres house. Naturally, it would be a dangerous place for anyone who wasn't a member of the family. Also, due to the presence of ancient magic, the flow of mana was different from that of modern mages. It was truly the worst place for a modern mage to be. The old man finally realized that he really would have died if it wasn't for Dane. He also realized that the boy in front of him might be a generational talent if he was already strong enough to freely train in that hellish place. Dane even made the antidote that he urgently needed to escape death. By his looks, this young man seemed to be somewhere in his teens. Despite his young age, he was capable of formulating an antidote that required extensive knowledge and precise production skills. The old man couldn't believe how blessed the Sogres family was. On top of 2 generational geniuses in the fields of magic and summoning, even the youngest son seemed extraordinarily monstrous. If the continent was still at war, the House Sogres could easily become the most powerful noble house within the Altheon Empire. The old man thanked Dane and admitted that he owed the young man his life. He was a bit startled by the kid's bold response, but asserted that he pays back the debts he incurred. First, he wanted to introduce himself properly. As it turns out, this old man was Sidrain Gauss. Not too long ago, he was the head of the Nixian Magic Tower. Sidrain took pride in his name and stature, inviting Dane to ask for whatever he wanted. The young man just smiled at Sidrain's humble brag. He knew that this old mage must be one of those people who survive without a home by storing everything they own in a subspace. Sidrain was thrown off by Dane's calmness after introducing himself. Normally, people would be surprised or humbled in the presence of a mage tower's head, but the kid was unfazed. Trying to re-establish his status, he urged Dane to ask for whatever he wanted without holding back. The young man paused for a second, seemingly thinking of his next words. Sidrain smiled with the expectation of being able to flex his reliability. But Dane simply asked for more time to think about his reward. He did not give Sidrain the satisfaction of feeling powerful with his indifferent response until the end. Dane turned to the door and wished the powerful mage a speedy recovery, telling him to rest some more. When the young man finally left the room, Sidrain just sat on the bed, flabbergasted by the nonchalant kid. He was the first person to ever treat Sidrain as if he were just some common magician. Old Sidrain was thinking of taking his leave after staying for a day or two, but that wouldn't be the case now. He had just found an interesting kid in the south, and he wanted to know more about Dane. Dane casually explained to Herman who Sidrain was, and the attendant excitedly explained that 8-chain mages are at the top of the food chain, the elite of the elite. That meant that an influential figure was currently indebted to Dane. You see, magic towers function as independent territories on this continent, more like sovereign nations. That meant Sidrain was an immensely influential person. Still, it's a mystery why the head of a magic tower was wandering the forest in the first place. But that was no ordinary forest. Mages consider it a forbidden area, dubbing it the Forest of the Last Days. Just from the name alone, it's evident that it's not the type of place ordinary people should take on. Dane looked at the sword in his hand and tasked Herman with getting him a new one. The ones he had been using had become too lightweight and short for his body. Luckily, they had a whole array of weapons from the spoils of war the Count brought back. Tomorrow, Dane could start training with a proper longsword. For now, he would just use the lightweight blade to wrap up his training. Come to think of it, he had the crest that Duke Thermion gave him too. A free coupon to forge whatever weapon he wanted. It had been 7 years since that day. Looking back, Dane remembers those days fondly. If he happened to venture into the capital, his first stop would definitely be the Duke's territory. After practice, Dane ran into his father outside the training hall. Dane thought his dad had matters to take care of outside the castle, but surprisingly, he returned earlier. Things wrapped up outside earlier than expected, and the Count had to hurry home to meet the head of the magic tower recovering in one of their guest rooms. He was hoping that Sidrain Gauss could help Arabella. She was going to need a good master after all. Dane also considered having the head of the magic tower help his sister, but he wasn't sure if the old man could handle that girl's temperament. He'd heard that Arabella punched one of her seniors for being annoying. In any case, Count Sogris praised his son for doing the right thing and saving another's life. Sure, he just did what had to be done, but he still went out of his way to do something that not just anyone can do. Dane had really grown up to be an amazing young man. As the years go by, it's getting more and more difficult for Count Sogris to even catch a glimpse of his daughter's faces. Arabella had finished her extended semester and was now choosing a magic tower to join, while Claire had been appointed as an assistant professor. It's the cost of having extraordinary children. Sure, Claire and Arabella were outstanding in their own right, but the Count also had high expectations for his only son. He often wonders how the world would handle a man of so many talents. The Count had been looking forward to the day when his rival, Bout Thermion, would see how Dane had progressed. It had been years since he was reincarnated as the son of the Sogres house, but the thought of crossing blades with Duke Thermion still fills him with determination. In any case, he also wonders how Layla is faring in the capital. Her last letter came maybe a year ago. Dane's looking forward to seeing what she's up to when he swings by the capital. A few days later, Sidrain complained about going stir-crazy from staying in the guest room. He still hadn't fully recovered yet. The doctor advised him not to venture too far out and forbade him from using magic. His magic reflux had not been purified yet, and the poison that seeped into his body had yet to be fully nullified. He would have to rest and recover for a bit longer. Sidrain didn't have much of a choice. It had been a while since he was unable to use magic, so this situation would be a change of pace. But he couldn't stand being cooped up in the room all day. So, he went out of the room even though he didn't know his way around the annex. The doctor worries that the old man might stir up trouble, and he'll be the one suffering. In the few days that Sidrain had stayed in the guest room, the housekeepers started spreading rumors about the old bat. They say that mages are either geniuses or nutcases. Some of the maids had seen Sidrain go up and down every single floor of the annex dozens of times, and now he was just looking at the flowers in the garden for hours on end. The maids heard that the old man was supposed to be an incredibly powerful mage, but all they'd seen was a crazy old nutcase. They worry for their Lady Arabella. Sidrain had been completely enamored by the beautifully crafted garden of the estate. He would never have guessed that they were arranged to possess such extraordinary magic. Dane came up to the old man. He had looked everywhere, only to find Sidrain in the garden. Sidrain wasn't too keen on being confined in a foreign place until his full recovery, but everyone just wanted what was best for him. In any case, the area was certainly a fine place to rest and recover. He could see why so many nobles come south once the vacation season starts. Dane loved the south, so it's a shame that he would have to leave soon. Curious, Sidrain asked the young man where he was going. Dane casually answered that he'd be heading to the capital soon. Sidrain assumed that the kid must be going to the academy. Both of his sisters were prominent figures in that prestigious place after all. While the daughters of the Sogre's house were famous for having sublime levels of talent, Sidrain was more curious about Dane's. So, he imbued mana in his eyes and decided to take a look for himself. Inside the young man's body was a roaring wave of pure power raging on. Sidrain's eyes went wide as he had never seen mana so thick. The density of the boy's power was unheard of. If geniuses in his age group could be considered a stream, then Dane was a raging rapid clearing everything that stood in his way. Normally, the sheer amount of magic in such a young body would be so unstable that it would be on the constant brink of bursting out. But that was not the case here. Dane finally called out the old man for assessing his magic without permission. He called it rude. Sidrain awkwardly stopped his prodding and praised the young man for noticing. He apologized and admitted that he might have been thoughtless. Inside, Sidrain was still trying to make sense of how Dane could contain such wild power inside him. In his years of being an archmage, the young man was a unique case. Confused by the old man's reaction to what he saw, Dane wondered what was up. Sidrain was so focused on the quantity and density of Dane's mana that he only realized now that the kid didn't have a magic circle. With his raging mana, a magic circle should be easy to form. The old man's face twisted in horror when he realized what travesty must have happened to the young man. Sidrain peered into Dane's heart and saw 2 mana cores. Of course, it was an unbelievable feat to develop 2 mana cores at his young age, but the old mage looked furious that he went that route. He reckoned that possessing such a crazy density of mana and using it to just wield a spear was lunacy. Sidrain believed that Dane using his mana to form cores instead of circles was blasphemy. The young man practically turned his back on the greatest talent that the archmage had ever seen. Confused by the old man's rant, he asked if he could just use both mana cores and magic circles. That only served to infuriate the old fart even further. He held his head in frustration at the wasted potential. He doesn't even know where to start explaining the gravity of the hole that Dane dug for himself. Sidrain asked the young man if he knew the reason why the lifespan of magic swordsmen was so short. It's because they possess both mana cores and circles simultaneously. However, those 2 concepts constantly interfere with one another. When they clash, problems arise. It had become an untold law of sorts. The mana compressed in the core would be transmitted to the circle. So, a circle that cannot handle the raging power would burst to pieces. Dane had a basic grasp of the concept himself, but he didn't know that it could be that bad. Sidrain had become grumpy seeing the best talent in the world squandered to train with a spear. Dane worriedly asked if it would really be impossible for him to pursue magic without a circle. Sidrain explained that while not impossible, refining mana without a circle to use spells that require purified magic would be theoretically improbable. Also, many have tried going down that theoretical path, but all attempts that Sidrain had personally seen have ended in failure. Nevertheless, this did not discourage Dane from giving this path a shot. Although he hadn't properly tried it before, he just felt like he could cast spells without the refinement of a magic circle. Sidrain thought the boy was going mad. So, Dane did not waste any time and started utilizing what he already knew to rearrange a magic code he was familiar with. After manipulating the runes and the mana in the air, the process went smoothly. With the rearranged magic code, he managed to produce a fire spell that had a decent kick to its explosion. All doubts in his mind were erased as he made it work. It was only a basic one-chain spell, but he managed to cast a spell without a magic core. Sidrain's mouth hung wide open in shock. Common sense dictated that anyone without a magic circle shouldn't be capable of casting spells. In his years of overseeing the Nixian magic tower, he had never seen anything like it. Dane continued modifying the magic code and created a mana barrier around his body. He explained that Arabella had discovered his high affinity for magic and wondered if that was the reason he could do improbable things with mana. That could be the case, but what he was doing was way out of the theoretical realm. Sidrain Gauss has stood at the pinnacle of mages for a long time now. This was his first time feeling what the commoners felt in the face of the elites and their otherworldly capabilities. He's witnessing a real world-shattering innate talent. Meanwhile, Dane was just amused that he managed to make the spells work. The old archmage's knees trembled in excitement. Dane had unparalleled mana affinity and purer and denser energy than anyone else in the world. The kid is the real deal. a one-of-one prodigy. Sidrain couldn't take it anymore. He immediately asked Dane if he would like to become a personal disciple. The old man worked really hard to convince Dane to learn his teachings, believing that ignoring such a talent would be a disservice to the world. Dane was getting tired of the old fart's persistence when Sidrain asked if he knew how to use a two-chain magic spell. The young man hasn't been exposed to two-chain magic codes, so he can't cast a higher-level spell. Sidrain Gauss laughed and bragged that if Dane went under his tutelage, he would be able to cast 8-chain magic spells in no time. Still, Dane politely declined the invitation. Sidrain's patience was running thin. Suddenly, Count Sogras interjected and laughed at the closeness of the Archmage and his son. When asked what the two were discussing, Dane honestly answered that the old fart kept on trying to take him in as a disciple, even after refusing several times. At least Sidrain knew how to behave properly in front of the man of the house, as he praised Dane for his potential to become a great mage in the future. He emphasized that Dane has a brighter future than anyone could even imagine, given that he could already use chain-level magic without a circle. As a warrior, Count Sogras had a rough idea of how unbelievable that fact was. At this point, the Count had stopped being surprised by his boy's inhuman feats. The young man had no basic knowledge of spells, yet he could naturally cast them. The Count also praised the former head of the Magic Tower for immediately seeing Dane's talent. But even though the word talent wouldn't suffice, Dane is a genius who could actually succeed in becoming an unparalleled magic swordsman. Hearing that phrase, Count Arkan imagined his son denouncing the spear and taking up the sword. His jolly mood shifted, and you could feel the anger in the air. The title of magic swordsman just doesn't sit right with Arkan. Dane cringed at the fact that Sidrain brought up a word that should never be brought up in front of his father. Failing to read the room, Sidrain continued to hammer in the possibility of Dane becoming a magic swordsman. He even promised to take full responsibility and make the young man into the Empire's most powerful fighter. By the time he realized the Count's mood swing, it was too late. Count Arkan screamed that his boy could not become a magic swordsman at the top of his lungs. Sidrain argued that sword and magic would be the perfect combination for a genius suited for both. Arkan continued ranting that his boy wouldn't become a magic swordsman. If anything, he'll become a magic spearman instead. Sidrain finally knew what the issue was. Dane just tried to stay as quiet as possible as his father calmed himself down. Poor Sidrain had never met a family as abnormal as the Sograses. You see, to a mage, becoming a disciple carries a great deal of meaning. Mages, especially powerful ones, normally raise their successors through the act of something called inheritance. It's a tradition carried through from ancient times to modern times, even when universal magic education had long since been established. What Sidrain Gauss was looking for wasn't simply a disciple, but a successor of his life's work, and the ones that came before him. Given how an 8-chain archmage was still desperately trying to get him to accept the invitation, Dane had gained a great deal of confidence in his talent and potential. He could feel a sense of unknown feeling swirling in his body. Now that he had become familiar with the basics of magic, he remembered a gift that Arabella left him a few years ago. It was a crystal ball he could use if he wanted to see his sister. Right now, asking Arabella for her opinion regarding the matter might be beneficial. Dane dug up the crystal ball and imbued his mana into it. He called Arabella telepathically, who was currently studying in the Academy's library. When she finally recognized his voice, she was surprised. Arabella immediately stopped what she was doing and beamed in joy that her little bro was contacting her. As expected, even Arabella was shocked to hear that Dane managed to use a one-chain spell without a magic circle. She knew his mana affinity was abnormally high, but she never expected it to be to this extent. The circle only serves to purify and circulate energy, so maybe Dane's mana was already pure enough to be used raw. To test this out, Arabella wanted to send a mana stone to the transmission machine in Dane's room to inspect his mana's purity. It's a good thing that he had Arabella to help him with stuff like this. Right now, she's already an established 6-chain mage, and her help has been incredibly reassuring. Arabella reckoned that since Dane could already use chain-level magic, attracting a lot of attention in the Academy would be inevitable. But that's the last thing he wants. It cannot be avoided, though. Talent always draws the attention of the masses. But Arabella assured her little bro that she would utterly destroy anyone who would dare to bully Dane. Speaking of bullies, Dane asked his sister about the news of her breaking the nose of a senior, the second son of the Dwell Duchy. Just thinking about the slimy bastard gets Arabella riled up. Realizing that she was taking the call in a public space, she tried to calm down. Anyway, with enough time, she theorized that Dane's mana purity would continue to increase. It's one of the possibilities they could look into. Unfortunately, their discussion had to be cut short as Arabella was needed by one of the professors. They said their goodbyes, and she promised to send the aforementioned mana stone over. The fact that Dane might be forging a path that had never existed before had finally sunk into him. With the extraordinary purity of his mana, he jokingly wondered if he had a dragon's heart beating in his chest or something. Meanwhile, Sidrain was still stuck in the annex for his recovery. He used a bit of mana to inspect Dane, and it worsened his magic reflux. He might have to stay for longer. If the kid would just accept his offer, he could have the most illustrious legacy among mages. He wondered just what he could do to entice the young man to join his side if Dane wasn't even interested in learning 8-chain magic. Maybe he should offer some grand and priceless artifact or pass on an inheritance refined through multiple generations. But if he offered his treasures up front, Sidrain could get scammed and he would have nothing left. As he was racking his brain for ideas, Dane knocked on the door. Sidrain wondered if the kid came over to apologize, or maybe even changed his mind regarding the offer. Dane came to find the old bat because he had something he wanted to say. Sidrain immediately assumed that the young man finally reconsidered becoming a disciple, but Dane quickly shut that nonsense down. It's not like he had no interest in magic at all. Sidrain asked if he already had a master or something, and that's why he kept refusing. But that's not the case either. Thinking that he was just being played, Sidrain asked why the young man what he wanted to talk about. It's simple, actually. Dane didn't know the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic yet. Learning from his sister would be difficult as she's far away. In the end, the best method would be to learn under Sidrain, a literal archmage. The old bat still owes him for the rescue, so refusing his request offhand won't be possible. Dane admitted to the old man that he does not want to only walk the path of a mage. He's not just going to become a magic spearman either. He wanted to become a magic spearman assassin summoner. As far as Sidrain knows, something as crazy as that doesn't even exist. Hell, Dane would even add swordsman to that title too. The absurdity of the young man's aspirations thoroughly frustrated Sidrain. To achieve that mouthful of a title, Dane had to draw the line and refuse to become the old magic tower head's disciple. Based on the young man's determination, Sidrain could see that Dane was already set in his way. Then, an idea came to mind. The old mage stood up and asked if Dane would be interested in a letter of recommendation. Since he was aiming to enter the academy, getting a letter of recommendation from the former head of Nixian Magic Tower would be a massive boost to his reputation. Dane thought about it briefly and reckoned that it wasn't a bad offer by any means. So he accepted the letter of recommendation, and while they were at it, he wanted to make another request. Sidrain quietly laughed to himself, thinking that the young man had finally come around. He can finally start securing his grip on an unparalleled genius. Seeing as the old man was feeling generous, Dane asked if he could learn the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. That won't be a big deal for someone like Sidrain. He knew the rearrangement code for all 2-chain magic in existence after all. Dane is still young. Giving him a letter of recommendation for the academy and some 2-chain magic codes wasn't a big deal. Although he wasn't in his best condition right now, Sidrain could start their lessons immediately. Dane slyly smiled to himself as he just reeled in a huge catch. He extended his hand and declared that with everything on the table, they could consider Sidrain's debt from being saved, paid in full. The old bat said it himself. Since he owed Dane a great deal of gratitude, he could ask for anything. So here he is, asking for what he wants. Sidrain did not like being played like this. He really thought he was finally getting a disciple. Dane's answer to his invitation remained the same. It's a big no. The old bat was tricked by a 14-year-old child. Refusing to back down, Sidrain insisted that the young man asked for 2 things when he only owed Dane for 1 thing. The young man begged to differ, though. First, he saved the unconscious old man from the forest. Second, he nullified the poison rampaging through Sidrain's body. He could have added the fact that he had to carry the unconscious old man all the way back to the annex, but he'll just consider it a bonus. Sidrain had no more rebuttals. He was thoroughly and logically defeated. He wondered how such a daring child existed in this world. Finally, Sidrain and Dane set up their lessons in the training hall. The old man had partially accepted that he might not get Dane as an official disciple, but he could continue to curry favor with the kid in case he changes his mind in the future. Sidrain just could not bear to let such a talent go to waste. The lecture finally started. They would have to work around Dane using chain-level magic without a circle. The young man would have to pay close attention as the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic is a lot more complicated than 1-chain. There are countless aspiring mages who can't even break through to this stage and end up giving up. Dane locked in, glad that he has such an accomplished instructor. Sidrain saw the sparkle in the kid's eyes and made sure not to go easy on Dane. He still had his reputation as an archmage to uphold after all. 2-chain codes are on an entirely different level because the caster has to calculate the amount of mana themselves. The magic density in the atmosphere and even the state of the body plays a vital role all at the same time. Magic's complicated nature is the reason most people give up on it entirely. Sidrain gave the complex definition, expecting Dane to ask for a simpler explanation. When he asked the young man if he needed any clarifications, Dane just smiled and let him continue. To Dane, learning not only the rearrangement of magic codes but also information he had no idea about was eye-opening. To make sure that he really got the principle, Sidrain asked him to discuss the rearrangement laws of magic. According to the young man's notes, the first law was coexistence. Magic power can exist in the physical world and with other sources of mana. Through coexistence, mages use their own power and the magic power in their environment to activate their magic. The second law is conservation. If magic power can collect enough of a particular elemental material, it can exhibit different attributes through conservation. Not only does Dane have a deep understanding of magic's nature, but he's also adding his own interpretations. Most people would find the theory of magic boring, but that wasn't the case for the young man at all. He had talent, tools, and a hunger for knowledge. How could such a perfect mage candidate exist? Continuing the lecture, Sidrain explained that magic codes become exponentially more complicated every time the chain increases. Rather than discussing theory, it would be easier to demonstrate. Sidrain adeptly summoned a sliver of his mana and made a simple grid of magic to demonstrate a one-chain magic cast using the simplest rules. However, the complexity rises from two-chain onwards. He transformed the sliver of mana into a swirling mess of runes and power, showing the rearrangement code for two-chain magic. Dane concentrated on the brilliant display and focused on how complicated the knots were. Sidrain manipulated his code and formed the two-chain fire magic, Fire Arrow. When it comes to magic codes, using them repeatedly is the key to mastery. The old man reckoned that Dane was finally recognizing how complex magic can be. According to his estimation, most people would take at least a year to jump from one-chain to two-chain codes. No matter how brilliant anyone is, the human mind can only understand a portion of the code at once. Sidrain noted that he'd be able to observe Dane's progress for about a week, as he drip-fed him the technique of mastering two-chain codes. But Dane wanted to give it a shot already. Sidrain didn't see the harm in it, expecting the boy to fail miserably. But when Dane started calling his mana out of his body to create the first code, he felt like he was witnessing a master at work. The young man locked in and used his hands to manipulate the pure mana swirling in the air. He ultimately formed the same grid that Sidrain demonstrated as the primary form of one-chain codes. Based on the lines at a set length and width with fearsome accuracy, the old man was thoroughly impressed. Dane could have stopped there, and he would be considered an indisputable genius. But where's the fun in that? He went further and deconstructed the mana grid to slowly form a swirling mess of mana in the air. Sidrain was stunned to see a perfect replication of the rearrangement code for two-chain magic he had just demonstrated once. When asked how he managed to do it so fast, he simply answered that he copied through observation and memorization of rules and patterns. He pictured every factor in his mind while forming the magic code, and it came surprisingly easy to him. Sidrain just kept getting wowed time and time again. Even though he, as a magic genius, took a while to get to two-chain, a boy without a magic circle easily made it in just a few minutes. As if he was trying to give the old man a heart attack, Dane declared that he would try to use the Fire Arrow spell as well. He made the mana and runes move around his body at impeccable speeds. Finally, he managed to rearrange the code in perfect order to manifest multiple fire arrows. Sidrain looked at the perfectly crafted fire arrows, refusing to believe what he was seeing. Seeing what this boy was capable of was making the old man spiral into an existential crisis. If only he had Dane's talent growing up, he would have long since attained his dream of nine-chain. Dane freely controlled the fire arrows, making them fly all over the training hall as the old archmage tried to compose himself. Even Dane was surprised that everything came naturally to him in one go. One thing was certain, the world would flip out when they saw a mage without a circle performing magic miracles. Sidrain knew that Dane's talent would need to be hidden before all sorts of people tried to approach him with impure intentions. Also, he was still not giving up on making the kid his disciple. Since Dane picked up the first code so easily, they could just keep going and learn even more codes. Sidrain reckoned that he might have to be careful about what he included in Dane's letter of recommendation to the academy. At the end of the day, Dane lay in his bed, reflecting on his magic lesson. He resolved himself to properly learn both theory and practice. Thinking about his past life, he had been forced into a life where he did not even have the option to learn magic. In the circumstances where he didn't even know when he would die in battle, trying to make time to learn magic was a luxury he could not afford. He had his hands full with swinging the sword and trying to survive while doing so. Up until a certain point, magic prioritized theoretical learning over practical spellcasting. In this life, he had the time, resources, and talent to look forward to learning a lot more things. Dane could combine the theory he learned from Arabella and the talent he was born with, and now, he could even show explosive growth if given simple guidance. Since he was being taught by a former tower master, he found himself looking forward to what kind of magic he would learn in the following days. Half a month later, Dane came to his father with a request to make something called a magic reagent. Since they didn't have the materials, he would need to go out of the territory. His father was a little startled by his son's progress. Sidrain backed Dane up, assuring Count Sogers that Dane was ready for a reagent now that he had mastered 4 rearrangement codes already. Usually, for geniuses, it should take a month to learn one code. Count Sogers also understood that magic reagents were hard to come by. Dane only learned about them while reading books in the family's magic library. Sidrain had long since accepted that the kid was just built different. He was even elated that Dane was interested in something as boring as magic reagents. Finally, the Count agreed to the plan, believing that this would be a great experience for his son. Since he was going outside, Dane would be able to see their territory for himself too. He smiled and thanked his father for trusting him to venture out. Dane set off on a short journey to the outer regions of Sogras territory. Alongside him were Sidrain and Herman. Even on the outskirts, the people of Sogras County still looked at and talked about him with veneration. Dane returned their welcoming sentiments with kindness and a smile. Through this journey, Sidrain gauged that Count Sogras must be a kind lord to his subjects based on how happy the people were. The South really does have a lot to offer. They have delicious snacks, great weather, and good people too. It's a sight that's extremely rare to see in the capital. That's why Dane loved this territory so much. Their small caravan had been traveling around the outskirts for a while, trying to reach the magic supply shop. Dane had never been to the shop before, so he called on Herman to lead the way. The three sped up and quickly reached their destination. The shopkeeper of the magic shop was shocked to see the famous young master Dane enter her humble business. She complimented him on his silver hair and stunning emerald eyes, and Dane thanked her. Not many people from the fiefs come to her shop to buy magic supplies lately. Fortunately, she's been getting by thanks to a lot of foreigners interested in magic. The shopkeeper also recognized Sidrain, the former lord of the magic tower, and expressed how grateful she was to have him in her shop. The old man was in a good mood now that someone finally recognized him. She invited the duo to browse her wares freely and told them to call her if they needed help with anything. Since it was Dane's first time in a magic shop, Sidrain urged him to look around as much as he wanted while the old man talked to the shopkeeper. With a cursory glance, Dane could already see a lot of cool stuff on display. They had potions, gems, charms, and everything magical, though he found it a little strange that he was feeling some sort of déjà vu. Moreover, he discovered that touching the wares showed him their magic reaction. He just chalked it up to his high affinity and continued browsing. Suddenly, a faint ringing sound echoed in his ears, seemingly demanding his attention. He could feel a particularly strong reaction from one side of the shop. Just as he approached that section, the owner informed him that everything on that side was just decorative items. Sidrain called Dane over to take a look at some potion ingredients together. The old man had already picked a few raw materials, such as moonroot, which could be used in at least 50 different potions. The owner assured them that her ingredients were personally processed to the highest quality. Meanwhile, Dane was too mystified by the strange ringing. As he walked deeper into the pile of decorations, he felt a strange power calling to him. He turned to see a piece of stone that was emitting pure mana. It must also have been the source of the ringing. Dane hurriedly approached the stone as though his body was moving on its own. Herman, seeing his young master behaving oddly, ran over with concern. To him, his young master was simply staring at a plain rock stuck in the wall as decoration. Dane wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but the stone was undoubtedly calling to him. He took it out of the wall and held it in his hands. As he suspected, imbuing the stone with more magic made the reaction even stronger. There was a possibility the object was uniquely reacting to his magic. Meanwhile, old Sidrain was still picking up raw ingredients left and right. Dane went over and asked the store owner what the story was behind the stone he had just plucked out of the wall. As the owner had said earlier, it was just decoration. But what kind of decoration has a magic reaction that is stronger than anything else in the shop? Sidrain asked if the owner had been cheated with the rock or something, and she admitted that a few years back, a peddler gave her a big package as payment. When she excitedly opened it, she found the plain stone inside. She held on to hope and had a mage appraise the stone, but it was confirmed to be just an ordinary rock. Based on Dane's interaction with the object, it was clearly not a normal rock. The owner urged the young master to focus on her other products and a few special magical artifacts instead of wasting his time on a rock. She tried to sell him a lot of valuable magical artifacts of all kinds, but Dane was still transfixed by the strange stone in his hand. It was the only thing he wanted. She showed him a name scroll card that automatically reads and stores all kinds of information to be cataloged. In the end, Dane bought the scroll card and the useless stone. He was sure this wasn't an object he could just leave behind. Even Sidrain was confused about what was going on in the young man's mind. On the ride back, the old bat curiously asked if Dane had an interest in decorative art, or if he really believed there was something special about the stone. When he explained that the slab was reacting to his magic, Sidrain kept an open mind. Although he didn't see anything special, his curiosity was definitely piqued. Since there were too many people on the streets, the small caravan hurried back to the castle. Sidrain set up an invaluable experimentation tool to help Dane figure out what the stone really was. He was confident he could appraise the stone accurately. Still, a mage had already appraised it and found nothing remarkable. Sidrain arrogantly declared that no mage appraiser was better than his tool. He had put all his funds into this state-of-the-art device for appraisals. He was confident it could analyze anything placed on top of it. Both of them were pretty eager to see what was up with the seemingly ordinary slab of stone. Sidrain placed the object on the platform and tasked Dane with imbuing his magic into the slab to stimulate a reaction. When Dane did just that, the stone immediately began radiating a richly dense amount of magic power. It lit up in the middle of the appraisal tool, its radiance swirling and forming something complex. Sidrain carefully monitored the explosion of light, keeping his eyes on the stone slab. Seeing his tool manage to bring out the mystery inside the stone, Sidrain could finally hold his head up high again after being humbled by the kid so many times. The mana coming from the slab danced around the room, forming runes in the air. Dane immediately understood what they were looking at, as he had been learning about these things with Sidrain for weeks now. Inside the stone was a magic code, but the old bat declared it wasn't just any ordinary code. It was amazing. Floating around them was a code whose structure, arrangement, and intricacies had never been seen before. It could be as complex as a 6-chain or even 7-chain code. So, the magic stone had a hidden code inside, and Dane's magic seemed to hold the key to unlocking it. The stone only responded to his mana. Sure, they had managed to bring the code out, but decoding what it was and why it only reacted to Dane's magic was an entirely different challenge. Even Sidrain, who was well versed in the magical arts, was unfamiliar with this particular type of magic. Yet his pride as a mage made him determined to crack the code. If he could succeed, they might uncover what made Dane's magic so unique. While Dane and Sidrain were working hard to decode the magic in the Sogre's training ground, Arabella was busy doing her own research back in her personal academy laboratory. Her lab was filled with neatly arranged books and artifacts from her various studies. Arabella had stored her little brother's mana signature in a magic stone and confirmed that there was indeed something unusual about Dane's power. His magic had a distinct characteristic, one that didn't match any known form of magic. She ran numerous tests and studied countless research papers, yet she still couldn't pinpoint which magical field this anomaly belonged to. She had tried everything: magic reagents, magic gates, magic engineering, and still, nothing yielded an answer. But she was convinced the truth was out there, hiding somewhere. Then, she suddenly remembered hearing about a long-lost field of magic, one that had disappeared from the magical world. Perhaps Dane's magic was related to this forgotten field? Arabella began rummaging through her mountains of books and literature, trying to remember where she had stored that old tome. It was a book that discussed alchemy, divination, spiritualism, necromancy, and a primitive form of magic code. While she excitedly searched, another dusty tome fell from the shelves. She picked it up, noticing it was an ancient magic book. Come to think of it, she had once studied the long-gone magical kingdom of Arcana, a civilization said to have existed over 2,000 years ago and inherited ancient magic from an earlier age. It was said to have practiced forms of magic that no longer existed. Arabella laughed to herself, shaking off the idea. Ancient magic had vanished a long time ago. There was no way Dane's magic could be connected to such a relic of the past. But at this point, she had nothing to lose, so she decided to try something unconventional. She placed the magic crystal containing Dane's mana into her magical typewriter and referenced the ancient magic book. After a few moments of concentration, Arabella opened her eyes in shock. The crystal was reacting. She quickly wrote down the mana's properties, her mind racing as she wondered if Dane's magic could be linked to alchemy, divination, or something entirely different. Arabella would be fine with any result, as long as it didn't lead her brother toward necromancy. When she finished analyzing the findings, she felt as though she had been struck by lightning. All she could say was, "What in the world are these findings?" Back in the Sogre's training ground, Dane and Sidrain were still hard at work, trying to elicit more reactions from the stone. After some time, Sidrain finally broke the seal on the slab. Inside the slab there was something else. The old man carefully extended his hand and pulled out the object. It was a simple accessory, a silver bracelet emitting dense magic power. To the untrained eye, it looked like any ordinary bracelet you could find in a marketplace. Sidrain initially thought there might be something special about the bracelet's material, but it seemed mundane. Given that the stone only responded to Dane's mana, Sidrain suspected the same would hold true for the bracelet. Dane slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. It dangled loosely at first, seemingly too big for him. But then came the reaction. The bracelet lit up, resonating with the magic in Dane's body. As expected, it only responded to him. Dane started to see strange characters emerging from the bracelet, glowing faintly. Sidrain leaned in for a closer look while Dane anxiously asked if the old mage could decipher the symbols. To Dane's surprise, Sidrain's face lit up with a broad smile. The characters were ancient runes, characters that no one in the current world could read. By ancient, Sidrain meant the language of the long-lost Arcana kingdom. Dane only knew a little about Arcana from what Arabella had told him when they were children. She had described it as a time when magic ruled every aspect of life. But then, suddenly and mysteriously, the era of magical prosperity had ended, leaving behind only a few relics and legends. And now, this strange line of magic code, sealed inside a stone, had been added to the ancient puzzle. Sidrain knew that Dane's magic was special, but he never imagined it would be linked to the ancient Arcana kingdom. This revelation intensified Sidrain's desire to have Dane as his apprentice. After all, the Forest of the Last Days, which had defeated even Sidrain, was rumored to be imbued with remnants of Arcana's disruptive magic. Dane's connection to this ancient power now made sense. Unfortunately, all they had at the moment were those few lines of indecipherable runes. Sidrain urged Dane to take his time and dig deeper into this mystery, but warned him to keep it a secret for now. Suddenly, their moment of quiet study was shattered. A terrifying sound echoed across Sogra's territory, causing both their eyes to widen in distress. Something horrifying was approaching.